to get the latest updates in HIV care and management, new treatment, prevention, and diagnostic methods as presented at different international meetings where groundbreaking research discoveries are made or shared. So this 3-day meeting, which is hybrid, has 5 main objectives: to update healthcare providers on the most recent research findings in HIV care prevention and treatment. We will also have an opportunity to discuss case management for pre-selected ART patients. We will exchange ideas and share experiences with regard to best practices and clinical care for HIV patients. We will also receive updates on recent epidemics. And lastly, to update participants on the advances towards ending and eliminating HIV. So I am very delighted to chair the first session, which is the opening session, but also the session that will take us through the key highlights from various conferences, and also very importantly, an update on PEPFAR. So to start us up, we have Dr. Sise Kitio, who is the Executive Director of the Joint Clinical Research Center. Dr. Sise is the director for is also the director for the JCRC College of American Pathologists Certified Laboratories. She's an experienced medical doctor of the Joint Clinical Research Center. Dr. Sise is the director for we apologize for that technical glitch. She's also a vaccinologist and a public health expert with over 27 years experience in conducting and coordinating AIDS research and care for patients. She's one of the pioneers in prescribing ART in sub-Saharan Africa. She has been at the forefront of scaling up HIV treatment in Uganda, including extension of antiretroviral therapy to all districts in Uganda. She also spearheaded the development of the state-of-the-art CAP accredited clinical and research laboratory at JCRC, equipped to perform a variety of tests and research laboratory at this center. And at this lab, a variety of tests and research studies, including molecular biology, HIV resistance, tuberculosis, HIV vaccine trials, pharmacokinetic studies, among others, are done. She has been the principal investigator, co-investigator for operational, clinical, and epidemiological trials of HIV treatment and associated infections like TB, as well as intervention studies aimed at preventing HIV transmission and prevention of HIV vaccines. She's the site PI of the Gilead studies and a co-PI for the JCRC sites of the AIDS Clinical Trial Group Network. She's a founder member of the Global Gene Therapy Initiative, which was formed to tackle the barriers to developing countries' inclusion in gene therapy development, and is working with various stakeholders to identify and address key areas that are requisite to successful implementation of gene therapy in developing countries. So join me as we welcome Dr. Sise Kitio to give her opening remarks. Over to you, Dr. Sise.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elena, for the elaborate introduction. Distinguished guests, representative of the Honorable Minister of Health, Uganda, development and implementing partners, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, from wherever you are calling in from to join this 17th annual HIV update meeting. On behalf of Joint Clinical Research Center, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this 17th annual HIV update meeting 2025. We are deeply honored to have you join us, whether here in person or virtually, for this important scientific ceremony. This annual HIV update meeting began as regional forums within Uganda, later expanded to the national level, then to the East African region. And this is now an internationally attended event. It is one of JCRC's scientific gatherings bringing together diverse researchers, students, clinicians, academics, representatives from the community, and policymakers. The overall goal of this annual meeting has already been expounded by Dr. Elena. And it's very important that we get to hear what is happening in the rest of the world, especially key research outcomes that are presented at international meetings, where many researchers, including from Uganda, but also other low and middle income countries, are not able to attend. So everything is aggregated and given to you here in one place. Please use this opportunity. I wish to take the opportunity to acknowledge our esteemed partners whose collaboration makes this meeting possible. We extend our appreciation, of course, first and foremost, to the Ministry of Health in Uganda. We are working with many universities to prepare, but also to conduct research. We have many NGOs we work with, including Mount Mebela, Muju, IDI, and others. And we have locally working with CDC and Central Public Health Laboratory. We appreciate your contributions. We have also many international partners who have supported this meeting in the past and continue to support us to hold it. And I will not go and break down or touch on each one, but all of you are most appreciated. The support from both local and international partnerships are invaluable, not only to this event, but to the JCRC mission, which is to conduct quality research, training that we provide, and also sustainable HIV/AIDS care and care for other health and provision of other health care services that we do, both in Uganda and nationally, and also the people we work with in other regions. I wish to sincerely thank our distinguished presenters whom you listened to. They were selected very carefully and they have very interesting presentations and updates to provide. I thank the session chairs who are going to be working with us for the next 3 days, including the Dr. Elena here, who has kicked us off. And then these are both local and international. Thank you for dedicating your time and insights to enrich this year's meeting. We have international presenters. They are those ones that have traditionally supported us in even preparation of the program. This includes Dr. Richard Elion, we have Dr. Ian Gilson, we have Dr. Frank Trame, and we also have Michael Madelo. These ones have been there for the 17 years actually. We do appreciate you very much. But we also have very distinguished presenters today. Today and the next 2 days. We have Dr. Anthony Fauci. He couldn't come, he recorded his presentation. We have Dr. Edward Van. We have Professor Dan Kouliskis. We have Dr. Steve Dix. We have Dr. Alex Asinwe. We have Dr. Sahera. We have Dr. Yeka Adoke. And some of these, we have collaborative research, and they are happy to contribute and make presentations. We have many local presenters. The list is very long, so I will not go through all of it, but we will listen to what they have to present when their time comes. We also have session chairs. Some of them are JCRC staff, but others are from our partner organizations. Last year, We had a total of 2,800 participants who attended all 3 days of this meeting consistently. So far this year, we had 2,764 participants from Uganda and internationally who have registered to attend. Attendance has increased each year, and we expect a similar trend this year. So you are all very welcome. I think this is a one-stop place where you get everything that has happened for the past year, updates. So as we start the 17th annual HIV update meeting, we have a very rich program. I encourage all participants to engage actively, attend all sessions. Please share your insights and build new collaborations. This is how we network, this is how we collaborate, this is how we start new research. Let us continue to draw inspiration from the remarkable progress we have made, while recognizing that our collective efforts are still needed to sustain the momentum towards ending the HIV epidemic. I thank you all for the dedication, the participation, for the contributions, and I wish you a very fruitful deliberations. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sise Chitio, for those opening remarks, starting us off for the first day and the first session of this 17th annual HIV update meeting. We are very delighted to have you on this call. My apologies, I forgot to introduce myself. I was very excited to start us off, but I will do that now. My name is Dr. Eleanor Namsoke Magongo. I am a pediatrician. I work with the Ministry of Health, where I lead the National Program for Children and Adolescents living with HIV. And I'm also the PI for the Uganda Pediatric ART cohorts, a longitudinal cohort where we are monitoring over 2,000 children. And I look forward to learning from this meeting. I hope you are as excited as I am today. So our next speaker is the JCRC Deputy Executive Director, Dr. Francis Sali. In his role, Dr. Sali leads efforts that continuously strengthen research and clinical services. He's a physician involved in the practice and teaching of HIV medicine, internal medicine, and hematology at JCRC and Makerere University College of Health Sciences. I must add at this point that Dr. Sali was also my teacher. He has over 3 decades of experience as a physician, specializing in internal medicine and hematology. For the past 21 years, he has been providing care and treatment for people living with HIV, sickle cell disease, and other medical conditions. He is involved in operational, clinical, and epidemiological trials of HIV treatment. He is an investigator on various studies, including the SCTG network studies, HIV reservoir studies, pediatric dose finding studies on recovery, studies investigating the effect of antiretroviral therapy on lymphatic tissue among people living with HIV in Uganda, and protocols in development for cell and gene therapy trials for both HIV and sickle cell disease. He is also a member of the Global Gene Therapy Initiative, which is an alliance of various experts working towards the development of and enabling access to cell and gene therapy products in low and middle-income countries, including Uganda, to give us his opening remarks. You're welcome, Dr. Sen.
Thank you, Elena. Good afternoon or good morning to you, everyone, wherever it might be. Because I know we have friends who are from North America. I can speak. You're most welcome. I'd like to welcome all of you to this 17th annual HIV update meeting. a lot has been said by Sisi about it. I'll just give some perspective around this HIV update meeting. Way back at the beginning of the paper program in 2003, that time there was very little known in our healthcare units about using ARVs because many health workers had not been seen them during their training. And we had a program called the FEED program, and we used to go up country and hold sessions, training sessions in various health units. And one of our key mentors during that time was Professor Frank Graziano, and he was very familiar. We all went with him to all parts of this country. And later on, when treatment had become more widely available in the country, we started having the annual program, which will bring together many groups that were involved in HIV care in the country. And this is the 17th year that we are doing it. As you are aware, many of the international conferences, very few people actually are able to attend them, like the CROI conference, like the Infectious Disease Conference, the AIS. And so this meeting provides a very wonderful forum for us to get updates on what has been happening in the area of HIV treatment, prevention, the complications, and also where we have reached in terms of cure. As you are all aware, we still have a HIV epidemic, have a goal to eliminate by 2030. But to date, we do not have a single drug that we can say this one alone can treat and control or perhaps even eliminate HIV. But we've had some advances in prevention, as you hear. So we expect a lot. We're going to have a packed program today. We're going to have Rick is going to put us up to speed with the, what is happening in the current major conferences that we have. We're also going to have the Frank Graziano lecture, which will be given by Professor Falky. And we have very great talks today, which are among the new things that we're going to have this year. We're going to have some talks, special talks on data, how to use big data in HIV. And also, we also have a wonderful program tomorrow that will address aspects of HIV science. We also have great talks updates pediatrics tomorrow, HIV and pediatrics. We're also going to have updates on the non-communicable diseases where they meet with HIV. So we're going to have great talks. And also we have some of the renowned speakers. Dr. Dan Harukins is joining us this year, and we'll get a great update on HIV resistance. And also we have Dr. Steve Hicks, who's going to give us an update of where we are with HIV cure. I'm sure many of you have questions on where we are. I'll just project some pictures just to give you some perspective. This was Professor Frank Graziano in one of the meetings that we had. Next slide. And in the meetings, the first meetings we've had both experts from outside and also experts from locally in Uganda. And this one he was with Professor Karebu of UBRI. Next slide. Next slide. And here, this was one of our I cannot recall which year this was, but one of our annual conferences. Next slide. As Sissy mentioned, Ian Gilson, Frank Madalone, and Frank Rain. We came here, and I think people missed this picture. But Frank worked with us in a team. We worked together. Next slide. And it's one of our but as Sissy has mentioned, the meeting has been big. We've had some hybrid sessions, and we also had virtual sessions. So this year's meeting is largely going to be, most of the presenters are going to be virtual, and most of the attendees are also going to be virtual. But I welcome you and wish you good deliberations. Please enjoy the meeting. Be very expectant. And partner also very expectant to the acts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salif, for those wonderful opening remarks. We are going to move on to our third speaker, Dr. Rick Elion. Dr. Rick Elion has been active in HIV care and research for 28 years. He currently leads a team at Whiteman Walker that is focusing on cutting-edge research initiatives in prevention and treatment of HIV/AIDS, hepatitis C, and other STDs. Dr. Elion's tenure at Whiteman Walker coincided with the organization being selected in 2013 as part of the AIDS Clinical Trials Group by the National Institute of Health, a distinguished honor for Whiteman Walker and rare for a community health center. Prior to joining Whiteman Walker Health, Dr. Elion served as co-director of HIV services at Washington Free Clinic in private practice in Washington, D.C., and in various research and clinical capacities in New York and in Washington. Dr. Elion received a bachelor's degree in English and psychobiology from Tufts University and a medical degree from Temple University. He completed his internship and residency at Duke University. He also holds a master's in counseling and spiritual psychology from University of Santa Monica. In addition to his duties at Whiteman Walker, he is currently an associate clinical professor of internal medicine at George Washington University and at Johns Hopkins University. You are very welcome, Dr. Richard Elion.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad to be with everybody today. It's very early where we are in New York City, and I want to say two things about individuals. We talk about all the things we're doing as a community and as a globe, but I want to speak about two individuals. The first is Dr. Graziano. Dr. Graziano was a professional athlete, professional football player, American football, not Ugandan football. And he was to be able to get to the point that he was a successful football player took a great amount of skill. And right when he had attained that, he decided he wanted a life with more meaning. And so he left professional sports and went back to medical school and trained to be an immunologist. And that's how he ended up becoming a doctor and doing the work he's done in Uganda. So it's an interesting thing about how someone can find what's really of meaning to them and go and study that. The second person I'm very pleased to be able to talk about today is Dr. Fauci. Dr. Tony Fauci has been a leader in HIV for the globe, let alone for the United States, as long as I've been involved in HIV, which dates back to 1984. So that's over 50 years that Dr. Fauci has been at the forefront of working with HIV. Dr. Fauci's scientific accomplishments are too numerous to mention, and I'm not going to speak at all of the different things he did. But I'd like to speak about him for a second as a person, not as a scientist. As a person, he was one of the first people to understand the needs to integrate the community of people who are affected by HIV, the families of that community, taking all those people in that community and integrating them into the research agenda. He created community boards where there would be dialogue between people in the community and people in the scientific community. So he enabled the world of science to be commingled with the actual world so that it wouldn't be uh, two separate locations, but one universal location, one universal market, if you will, where all of humanity, science, and those in politics would merge. And that was a great accomplishment of his. And as many of you may know, we've had a lot of political changes and upheaval in the United States. And Dr. Fauci was pulled into that, and wrongly so, I believe. But he was pulled into that in an era where we now have a lot of efforts in the United States to rethink what science is. And so the integration of the community and science has created all sorts of consequences we could have never fully understood. But Dr. Fauci has stayed true. He has stayed true to his North Star, his vision of honesty and integrity, his ability to still find ways to merge science into communities, knowing that only through this merger and through trusting in science can we really help emerge from the darkness of disease into the light of health and prosperity. And so I want us all to learn from his experience because I know in Uganda you have, and I'm sorry not to be with you, we were able to come many times, although for some reason they didn't include me in those pictures, but I was there. And I think it's important to understand as we have political, social upheavals in whatever country you're in, because I know there's people from multiple countries on this call, please remember the values that brought you to this work. Please remember the values of science, of finding things that you believe are true, that will be true for others, and that have meaning to others. And that value of science integrated with your passion for your fellow men and women in your community brings us to the world of service, which is part of what we're doing today. So with that in mind, I want to thank all the organizers, Dr. Kitu, Dr. Sali, everybody we've worked with the last 20 years. We're thrilled and honored to be part of this scientific and community effort. And I'll be with you all later for some talks. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elion, for those wonderful remarks and reminding us to go back to the values that brought us into this very important work. Our next speaker, and who will be officially opening this meeting, is none other than my program manager, Dr. Robert Mutumba, who is a seasoned public health specialist with a Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Surgery. Dr. Mutumba holds a master's degree in public health and completed the Afia Bora Consortium Fellowship in Global Health Leadership and Management at the University of Washington. He has over 14 years experience in leading integrated healthcare programs in areas of reproductive, maternal, newborn, and child and adolescent health, sexual and reproductive health, HIV/AIDS, malaria and tuberculosis, gender-based violence, mental health, among other intervention areas. Currently, Dr. Robert Mutumba works as the Uganda Ministry of Health Assistant Commissioner and Program Manager for the STD/AIDS Control Program, where he's responsible for leading teams at the national and subnational level to implement a priority package of STD, HIV/AIDS response interventions in the country. It's responsible for developing and monitoring plans for implementation of HIV/AIDS prevention and control programs, providing technical support related to HIV/AIDS, monitoring utilization of resources for the HIV program, preparing and submitting periodic performance reports on the HIV/AIDS prevention and control program, as well as supervision, coaching, and performance of staff, among other duties. Join me as we welcome Dr. Robert Mutumba to give us his remarks and to officially open the 17th annual HIV/AIDS update meeting. You're welcome, Dr. Mutumba.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elin. The distinguished guests in your various capacities, the Executive Director of Dr. Sisi, the Joint Clinical Research Center here, colleagues from the academia, and in all your various capacities, ladies and gentlemen. As introduced, my name is Dr. Robert Mutumba, Program Manager for the AIDS Control Program, Ministry of Health. I am very delighted, and it is indeed a pleasure to deliver remarks at the opening of the 17th annual HIV update meeting. These remarks I will deliver on behalf of our Honorable Minister of Health, who for a number of official duties has not been able to make it to this meeting. But you will allow me to read our remarks verbatim. It is indeed a great honor and privilege to officiate at the opening of the 17th annual HIV update meeting 2025. I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to the Joint Clinical Research Center management and the leadership for the tremendous work done over the years, and for inviting me once again to officiate at this very important event. Allow me to warmly welcome all of you to this year's meeting, including colleagues from the Ministry of Health in Uganda, colleagues from Gilead Sciences, our distinguished presenters, including both the local and international presenters, and the participants joining us online from Uganda, from across Africa and the US and the world and around the entire world. It is a pleasure to welcome you all to this important scientific gathering of researchers, clinicians, policymakers, students, and members of the public, all united by a shared commitment to ending the HIV epidemic and addressing the challenges it continues to pose in care and treatment. This meeting plays a crucial role in enabling participants to access the latest updates in HIV care, management, prevention, diagnostics, and treatment innovations. It provides an opportunity to share groundbreaking research findings and best practices, many of which are first presented at major international conferences where not everyone can attend. Such forums like this enhance learning, foster collaboration, and promote the dissemination of new scientific evidence to improve HIV care. I am pleased to note that experts and participants of this meeting will also discuss real-world cases that provide valuable lessons for improving quality of care. I commend all presenters and session chairs, both the local and international, for dedicating their time and expertise to this meeting. I also wish to extend my sincere appreciation to our partners who have worked collaboratively with the Joint Clinical Research Center in organizing this event. These include the Uganda Virus Research Institute, the AIDS Support Organization, Gilo Young Positives Foundation, Makerere University College of Health Sciences, the Uganda Ministry of Health, Friends of Canon Gideon Foundation, Centers for Disease Control, Uganda, Baylor Children's Foundation, Uganda, Makerere University John Hopkins Collaboration, the Central Public Health Laboratories, and the Uganda Heart Institute. I also acknowledge and thank all organizations and partners in and outside of Uganda that have provided financial and technical support for this meeting. On behalf of the Ministry of Health, I reaffirm our commitment to continue providing strategic guidance and collaborating closely with the Joint Clinical Research Center and all partners in our collective efforts to end the HIV epidemic in Uganda. With those few remarks, it is now my great honor to officially declare the 17th Annual HIV Update Meeting 2025 open for God and my country.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mutumba, for those remarks and for officially opening this very important meeting. We are now going to move on to the Professor Frank Graziano Memorial Lecture, HIV/AIDS Science, Policy Science, and My 44-Year Journey. This will be delivered by Dr. Anthony Fauci, who has served as a distinguished university professor at Georgetown University of Medicine and McCourt School of Public Policy since 2023. He is also a distinguished senior scholar at the O'Neill Institute of National and Global Health Law at Georgetown. Previously, Dr. Fauci directed the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at the National Institutes of Health from 1984 to 2022. In that role, Dr. Fauci was a key advisor to 7 presidents on global HIV/AIDS issues and on preparedness against emerging infectious disease threats. He also served as the chief medical advisor to President Joe Biden. Dr. Fauci was one of the principal architects of the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, which has helped save more than 25 million lives throughout the developing world. Dr. Fauci is a member of the National Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Medicine, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and many other professional societies. He has received numerous awards, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the National Medal of Science, and the Mary Woodward Lasker Award of Public Service. He has been awarded 6 honorary doctoral degrees from universities in the United States and throughout the world, and is the author, co-author, or editor of more than 1,400 scientific publications. Dr. Fauci also authored the autobiographical on Call, A Doctor's Journey in Public Service, which reached the number one on the New York Times bestseller list in 2024. Dr. Fauci, it's an honor to have you give the Frank Graziano Memorial Lecture. You are very welcome, and over to you.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very sorry that I cannot be with you in person today, but I appreciate the opportunity of being able to make this presentation to you. As you can see from the first slide, I've decided on the title HIV/AIDS Science, Policy, and the 44-year journey that I've had with HIV, with a particular emphasis on the PEPFAR program, which we know now has had such an extraordinary impact, but is now under threat. So let's start off many years ago when I was at the NIH, after having been there literally as a fellow and then as a senior person ever since 1968. But several years into my tenure there, something very extraordinary happened. This MMWR in June of 81 landed on my desk describing the first recognition of persons which ultimately turned out to be HIV. 5 young men, curiously all gay men from Los Angeles, who presented with pneumocystis pneumonia. 2 of them had already died. They were previously healthy. We didn't know what was going on. 1 month later, in July of 81, another MMWR, now more than curiously, but amazingly, 26 all gay men, not only from LA, but from New York City and San Francisco, who presented with this strange pneumocystis pneumonia seen only in immunocompromised individuals, together with other opportunistic infections and Kaposi's sarcoma. The era of the recognition of HIV/AIDS before we even had an etiology or a name had begun in the summer of 1981. It was a disease, as I mentioned, without a name. Some examples of early names were GRID, inappropriately, gay-related immune deficiency, or gay cancer, or gay plague, thinking incorrectly that it was exclusively restricted to the gay population. It wasn't until September of 1982 that a name was given, and I was part of that discussion down at the CDC when we were talking about naming it an appropriate name, which we came up with, the acquired immune deficiency syndrome. But then as the months went by, it became clear that at least in the United States, it was not restricted to gay men. We were seeing it among Haitians who were heterosexual, who were also living in the United States, likely due to an original connection with sub-Saharan Africa. Then hemophiliacs, transfusion, infants born of infected mothers, and the female sexual partners of men with this new disease. Interestingly and overwhelmingly importantly, things were going on in Africa that well antedated this recognition in the United States and in the developed world, European Union, etc. An interesting and important report in The Lancet from Peter Piot and Tom Quinn, who was a member of my laboratory at the time, that African patients with AIDS had immunological abnormalities like patients in other parts of the world. And in fact, there was a reluctance to call this AIDS because it was in heterosexual people with a 1-to-1 ratio of men to women. It was only a bit later that it became clear that we were dealing with the same disease, and it was predominantly in the developing world, including sub-Saharan Africa. Back in the United States, I began admitting and personally taking care of and studying in early research studies these desperately ill patients. And this is a picture of me on my clinical rounds. I refer to it in my memoir, which I wrote just last year, as the dark days of my professional career, because this was prior to antiviral drugs, and essentially all of my patients, with very few exceptions, died. And in fact, in a New England Journal of Medicine report in November of 1987, an experience with cases in New York City, the probability of death at 1 year was over 50%, and at 5 years was 85%. Then some bright lights began to appear. In the summer of 1987, the first drug effective against HIV was approved by the FDA based on the first and only placebo-controlled trial with AZT in persons who had AIDS. Shown the dramatic data, 19 of the people in the study died who were on placebo, compared to only 1 who were receiving the drug. Then over the subsequent several years, we went from AZT monotherapy on the left part of the slide, which showed a modest, not very, very profound dip in viral load that was transient. And many people, in fact, the majority of people on monotherapy would wind up relapsing in their disease. As we got into the 1990s with 2-drug therapy, things got better, but again, rarely getting to below detectable and almost invariably rebounding back. It was only in 1996 that the triple drug therapy, anchored in the protease inhibitor, gave not only below detectable viral level, but durable in that the virus did not rebound in most people religiously taking their drug. This became known to the world in papers in various journals, but presented at the International AIDS Conference in Vancouver in 1996, in which highly active antiretroviral therapy proved to have a dramatic transformative effect, not only on viral load, but on the life of individuals living with HIV. This dramatic slide from the CDC in 2013 shows the rather impressive, beyond impressive, drop in death rate following the introduction of antiviral therapy that was highly effective in 1996. Fast forward to today, in 2025, throughout the world, these are data from the FDA in the United States, but it's the same in almost all developed nations. There are about 40 FDA-approved antivirals, including 13 of which are single tablet regimens containing multiple drugs capable of bringing the viral load to below detectable. The impact on life expectancy is dramatic. This shows the impact on a typical 21-year-old with HIV in the 1980s compared to today. As I showed you in the slides of my making rounds at the NIH, from the time of diagnosis, 1 to 1.5 to 2 years, patients were dead. A very, very terrible impact on life expectancy. Today, if a 21-year-old comes in with HIV and is put on proper therapy, you can predict that they would live an additional 56 years, giving them a life expectancy almost, not quite, but almost the normal life expectancy of an uninfected person. So let's move on with that as the background of the efficacy and the important impact of antiviral therapy, and talk about the origins of PEPFAR, of which I had the privilege of playing a role in with other people. I want to put some history to this because it really relates. I've had the privilege of dealing with 7 presidents of the United States during my almost 40 years as director of NIAID. One of the most important relationships with the Bushes. Here is a picture of me on rounds where Vice President, then Vice President George H.W. Bush, visited the NIH, and I became friends with him. And he promised if he would become president, he would visit me again and we would talk more seriously about HIV. This is a picture in one of the rooms on the wards of my patients where I invited the president and his wife, Barbara Bush, to visit the NIH, and I would introduce him to several of the patients in my group that I was taking care of with HIV. So this is the picture of the president sitting next to one of my patients. I'm there on the right in my white lab coat. But even more important than his visit there was who he brought with him. And sitting in the corner is a very young George W. Bush, before he became president, before he became the governor of Texas, and before he became the owner of the Texas Rangers baseball team. I got to know him, and that meeting was to be replicated years later in something that had a very important impact on the development of PEPFAR, and I'll explain in a moment. Now, again, if we fast forward a bit, that the effort to block the transmission from mother to child with HIV had a big boost in a study showing that AZT therapy given in the 2nd or the 3rd trimester to a pregnant woman and to a newborn for a few weeks after birth decreased significantly the transmission of mother to child. But the conventional wisdom was that this prevention of mother to child transmission regimen is too expensive and not feasible for sub-Saharan Africa, because people, knowing that the major burden of HIV was in sub-Saharan Africa, that we needed to do something, even if it was just preventing mother to child transmission. But something happened a couple of years later with the single dose nevirapine study, which when compared with AZT, did much better and was much less expensive, making it feasible to perhaps use this in a treatment or prevention program of HIV and mother-to-child transmission. The media were very excited about this, as shown by the headlines in the New York Times, USA Today. $4 regimen can save infants from HIV, a low-cost way to cut mother-to-child transmission. Simultaneously, there was a lot of activity throughout the world about things that we could possibly do with access to drugs in Southern Africa. And there was a global march for treatment access in Durban, South Africa in the summer of 2000. And these kinds of activities were going on throughout the world, but particularly in Southern Africa. Getting back to George W. Bush, I developed, by an interesting twist of circumstances, a very close relationship with President Bush. And let me explain. It related to a tragedy in the United States. I had gone to Uganda in 2001 in April, and I met with my colleagues shown on this slide. And I became even more impressed that something needed to be done in Southern Africa. And I was not alone in this, but this is something that troubled me greatly. So getting back to my relationship with George W. Bush, the tragedy that I alluded to was the terrorist attack a couple of months later from my visit to Uganda in September of 2001, followed by the release of anthrax in letters sent to politicians and newspapermen. George Bush was very concerned about preparing for a bioterror attack, and he called upon me and my colleagues at the CDC to see what we can do in preparedness for that. He proposed a major $27 billion budget for the NIH to get $1.5 billion aimed at bioterrorism. However, all of this not only could be used against pathogens that were deliberately released, but we convinced him that we may use it for emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases. And on a very fortuitous trip that I had the privilege of going on with George W. Bush when he was going to Pittsburgh to talk about bioterror preparedness, I was on the plane with him, and he called me to his cabin and said, "Tony, what scares you the most among potential microbial threats that a terrorist might use?" My response to him was, "Mr. President, I worry more about the natural occurrence of, let's say, an influenza pandemic and the ongoing plague of HIV than I do about a bioterror attack." He had always been concerned about HIV/AIDS, but I think the discussion kind of crystallized it a bit. Shortly thereafter, he called me to the White House and said to me what he had been saying to others. And I give you a quote: "We as a rich nation have a moral obligation to help those who do not have access to HIV treatment and care because they lack the resources." And so he sent me, together with HHS Secretary Tommy Thompson, to Africa to determine the feasibility of whether or not something could be done. And we did not know yet what something was. We made a visit to a few countries, and I had been to Africa multiple times before, to see if, in fact, we could do this. And I became convinced, talking to my African colleagues, that this is something that is feasible, that could be done. I came back to the United States and I made a presentation to the president and selected senior staff for a proposal of $500 million for the prevention of mother-to-child transmission. And I showed the White House and I circled the room that I made that presentation. The president felt that this was something that could be done to his great credit and approved the $500 million mother-to-child prevention initiative. However, it did not stop there. I show this picture of someone who you may not have heard of. His name is Josh Bolten, and he was the deputy chief of staff to the president at the time. And the president, after the announcement of the mother-to-child transmission initiative, told Josh Bolten that he wanted him to work with me. And this was his quote, which I wrote down. He said, "Tony, the initiative is a great start, but we need to do something on a much broader scope, something that is truly transforming. So go work with Josh and put something together for us. It needs to be transforming and accountable." So from June of 2002 to the end of the year, we worked literally full time in the development of the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. I couldn't do it alone. So fortunately for me, in my laboratory at the NIH, the Laboratory of Immunoregulation, were a number of very bright, energetic people. One of them was a person named Mark Dybel. And Mark was a person who was interested not only in the laboratory work, but wanted to do something of more of a global impact. So I partnered with Mark and we went about trying to put together a program that would be acceptable to the president. We were not alone. And I feel it's important to bring to your attention people that you never heard of, that played an important role. And I call them the unsung heroes of the birth of PEPFAR. Gary Efson, who was Deputy National Security Advisor to Condoleezza Wright. Jay Lefkowitz, who was Deputy Director of Domestic Policy. And Margaret Spellings, who was Director of Domestic Policy at the White House, together with Mike Gerson, who was the chief speechwriter for George W. Bush. So together over those months, back and forth, I devoted most of my effort in putting various versions. And these were some of the areas of intense discussion during those months. Should we make it a demonstration project or a major program? How many countries? Should there be only countries with relationship with the United States? What's the difference of the proportion between prevention versus treatment versus care? Should it be only Africa or other countries, such as India, China, and Russia? Should the cost be very expensive, like a Mercedes car, versus inexpensive, like a metaphorical Chevrolet car? There were people in the White House, particularly in Office of Management and the Budget, who actually were very skeptical about the plan. And although they were well-meaning, they kept pushing back on it. So they told me that we had to get validation from other people that this was worth the investment of a lot of money. So what I did is I called upon 4 of my friends to come to Washington to convince the OMB that what we were putting together as a proposal for the PEPFAR program was worthwhile. And Paul Farmer came from Haiti, Eric Gooseby came from Rwanda, Bill Pop came from Haiti, and Peter Mugenyi came from Uganda. And we met together in a restaurant in Bethesda, Maryland, and I told them to please go to the White House and just give your very best effort to convince them. They did. And in fact, the plan that I was putting forth now was very well receptive by the Office of Management and the Budget. Again, we all know what happened. The president announced that Peter McGaney was asked to come and join First Lady Laura Bush as a special guest in the State of the Union address, where President Bush announced the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief on January 28, 2003. The initial proposal that we put together was for $15 billion over 5 years to prevent 7 million new infections, to treat 2 million people, and to care for 10 million people, including vulnerable children and AIDS orphans. It was initially in 14 to 15 countries. Today, fast forward, PEPFAR supports more than 50 countries with a total funding of greater than $110 billion. The U.S. Global AIDS coordinators leading PEPFAR are shown on the current slide. You're familiar with all of them. And again, you see a picture there of Mark and of Eric, who were involved in the early part of the formation of the program, and both of them ultimately turned out to actually be individuals who led the PEPFAR program. If you look at the results, you're all familiar with it. As of December 31st, 2024, 26 million lives were saved, 20 million people on antiviral therapy, including over 500,000 children, more than 7 million babies born free of HIV, 83 million people tested, and 2.5 million people newly enrolled on PrEP to prevent infections. Now, despite that great news, HIV remains a global HIV pandemic. The numbers are still rather impressive in a negative way and in a disturbing way. 40.8 million people globally living with HIV, 1.3 million people newly infected, 630,000 deaths, and a cumulative death of over 44 million. Although we have transformative HIV interventions, we know now you can decrease the level of virus to below detectable, not only saving the life of a person, but making it virtually impossible for that person to transmit to someone else. Hence the terminology U equals U, or undetectable equal untransmittable. We know that with pre-exposure prophylaxis, if taken religiously on a daily basis, can decrease the acquisition of HIV of an uninfected person more than 99%. However, and it's a big however, the global HIV treatment gap exists. Although there are over 31 million people on antiviral therapy, since there are 40.8 million people living with HIV, there's a treatment gap of over 9 million people. We've tried to do something about that to make it easier, and I believe the long-acting cabotegravir plus rilpivirine every 8 weeks, every 2 months, may make a major role in getting treatment to more people. The global HIV and the global HIV prevention gap is also something that needs to be addressed. As I mentioned, the HIV pre-exposure prophylaxis with the pill is greater than 99% effective if optimally and consistently used. However, the global PrEP coverage, although improving, is still inadequate. There are now a number of people who are receiving PrEP has increased to 3.5 million. However, 21 million people need to be on PrEP, which is the 2025 target. Now, there are advances now that I believe, and we all believe, can be transformative. First of all, long-acting cabotegravir is superior to oral Truvada in preventing HIV infection. And given every couple of months can actually wind up having an important impact. But even more impressive is the new data and the new approval of lenacapavir, which in the studies that we're all familiar with, were 100% effective among women and adolescent girls in the Purpose 1 study, and 96% effective of efficacy in gender diverse people and in men in Purpose number 2. The approvals are coming along. There are 3 regulatory approvals in the United States, European Union, and South Africa, pending approval in multiple countries, pre-qualification by the World Health Organization. However, what's going on now is not enough, as we all know. The PEPFAR, under the current regime, is an initiative by the Global Fund, together with PEPFAR, to get up to 2 million people in countries with high burden. But UNAIDS estimates that 20 million people will be needed to be reached with antiviral-based prevention. So we need to do much better. Now, having said that, when one looks at the future history of HIV, we're not going to eradicate it. We're certainly not going to eliminate it, but we can control it, as we all know, at the lowest possible level. And the thing that's disturbing and has been really a source of great pain and concern for me and my colleagues here, but all in the United States, but also globally and particularly in Southern Africa. The promise of victory, as the New York Times said, over HIV fades somewhat as support in the United States is being withdrawn. And in fact, without US funding and an additional 6 million HIV infections and 4 million more age-related deaths could occur by 2029. So it is extraordinarily important, and hopefully things will change where people will realize the importance of continuing the support through PEPFAR, through the Global Fund and other ways, together with the local countries putting in more effort so that we can ultimately get the goal of ending this pandemic by transforming these scientific advances into a full implementation of the resources that we have. Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. Dr. Fauci taking us through where we started with this HIV journey, the progress we've made, and special thanks to the American people for their generosity that has saved many lives. So thank you once again, Dr. Fauci, for such an amazing lecture. The last speaker for our opening session is Miss Gloria Nawanyaga, who is going to be speaking on growing up with HIV, lessons from my journey. Gloria holds a Bachelor's of Laws degree from Uganda Christian University, specializing in human rights and international humanitarian law. 27 years, and she's 27 years of age. She's one of the outspoken advocates in the field of HIV, sexual reproductive health and rights, gender equality and human rights in Uganda. She's so passionate about empowering young people through capacity building so as to realize their full potential in order to make informed decisions and healthy choices. Gloria is also the founder of GILO Young Positives Foundation, a youth-led charity organization that empowers, equips, and educates young people, both infected and affected with HIV, to improve on their livelihoods and well-being. She has empowered over 10,000 young people living with HIV and those affected with HIV so as to improve their livelihoods and well-being. And the programs they implement include quality of living of young people living with HIV, economic empowerment, human rights advocacy, and promoting good health and well-being. She's an HIV advocate and activist, strongly passionate about a world free from HIV and an HIV-free generation. She's the Miss Young Positives, Miss Y Plus 2017-2018, which is a campaign organized by the Uganda Network of Young People Living with HIV. And she's also a former board member where she's a representative of young people living with HIV, advocating for zero stigma and discrimination, sexual, reproductive health and rights, promoting universal access to HIV prevention, treatment and care and support, and promoting greater involvement of young people living with HIV in policy making. And lastly, she's the founder of the Y Plus Music Band, which is a band for young people living with HIV who believe that they can use their talent to create a positive impact in society, mainly through edutainment, and they have developed talents of over 500 young people through song compositions, voicing, and video production. With that introduction, you are very welcome, Gloria, to share with us your story. Over to you, Gloria.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eleanor. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, depending where you are from. My name is Manuela Gloria. Just like Dr. mentioned, I am so much happy to be here. And I want to thank the SRC for sponsoring this HIV update meeting and organizing it and all other partners. My story started at around 11 years when I got to know that I'm HIV positive. And I vividly remember my mother asking me, what do you know about HIV? At the age of 11, what I know about HIV is anyone who has HIV is going to die. So I knew definitely if I have HIV, I'm going to die. So she asked me, what will you do if you find out that you're HIV positive? But before her asking me that, I used to ask her questions. Why am I taking medication? Why am I going to hospital? And I'm a proud, connected product, for lack of a better word, product of SRC. So I want to thank SRC for giving me life. I've been a baby for SRC, ever since I was born. So I used to come to SRC with her to take the medication, to come for the home visits. And I would ask her, why you take me to hospital? Definitely, I think she was afraid to tell me because of the stigma that was associated with HIV. So she decided one time to take me out and she asked me what's about HIV. Just like I said earlier, at the age of 11, what I knew was HIV kills, because that is what is taught to us in school. And when you go in schools right now, you find posters everywhere, HIV kills, HIV kills. So what I knew was HIV kills. And she asked me, what could you do if you find out that you're HIV positive? At that time, I related because her asked me that question and me asking her why I'm taking medication and figured out that I'm HIV positive. And that time I hated myself. I hated my parents. I started judging them and always asked my mother, why did you give me HIV for me to die? Why did you give me HIV for me to suffer? So I even tried to commit suicide because I thought I'm going to die anyway. I did not see any hope in me. I didn't see a future anyway because HIV kills. That's what we were told. So my mother really struggled a lot with me, to accept the fact that I'm HIV positive. And I'm happy that the current speaker talked about Professor Miro, who started Muju, John Hopkins University. So my mother had heard about Muju, and she took me to Muju. They have a segment for young children actually called YGA, and I started psychosocial support from there. And it's from that time when I saw children who are like me, because I thought I was alone in this world. I thought there are no other children who are living with HIV like me. And when I went there, I saw these young children, jolly, lively. I was like, oh, so I can also be like this. So it helped me to overcome the self-stigma that I had, but then also to know that I'm not alone in this world. Even though it was a long journey for me to fully accept and embrace myself and also forgive my parents. I know my mother always told me there's no parent who wish bad for their children, but of course, definitely, as a child, I could not see that. For me, what I saw is she gave me her dates for me. die. So it took me over 10 years to fully embrace myself, accept myself, and I faced a lot of stigma, even though I was receiving the psychosocial support from Moju, from JSRC. I used to also have a series of depression, breakdown, series of drug holidays, because definitely I knew even if I take the medication, I'll still die anyway. So I thank God that eventually, after a decade, I accepted myself. And of course, this came as a result of the stigma that I faced in school. One day, when I joined university, I met a young girl who wanted to be my roommate. And when she came to me, she told me I want to be a roommate. I accepted. I was very happy. I'm going to, have a roommate at campus. So little did I know that us living together will lead me to a bittersweet moment that I'm going to share later. And I'm calling it a bittersweet moment because some people say that it's a blessing in a disguise. So this young lady was studying together, same university, same course, same school and everything. And she had a boyfriend. So the boyfriend would come in. But during that time, unfortunately, that was the time my father died of AIDS. Since he was a breadwinner at home, we kind of lost income, and my mother was a stay-at-home mother. She was a housewife, so we're financially struggling at home. So this friend of mine, at that place, they were well off, they were doing okay. So I had to literally depend on her during the time when I was staying with her. And I think maybe because I was depending on her, she kind of felt entitled because she used to buy the food I used to eat. She owned everything in the room because for me, I was, financially unstable at home. I could not afford anything. So later on, because I think of her entitlement, because she had a boyfriend who would come in once in a while. And somehow the boyfriend would see me take the medication and he would ask me, why are you taking medication? And I would lie to him because I was not okay by that time to talk about my HIV status openly. I would tell him that I have stomach pain sometimes, have headaches. I would not really tell him my HIV positive status. So I think, when this girl got entitled, she came to me, she told me, what, I want my boyfriend to move in, blah, blah, blah. It was not easy for me, but because I was depending on them, I could not really say no. So the guy moves in, and you know how difficult it can be having, a guy in the same room. But nevertheless, God helped me to maneuver around. But just like, it's a natural thing men can admire. So I think this young man admired me because I'm also not ugly.
That's it.
Yeah, so he came to me, told me, Gloria, I like you. That was the most fit thing I've ever had because your girlfriend is my friend, my housemate, my classmate, we share everything. So how could you even expect me to love you? So when I rejected him, I think it turned the shame into anger because I had the access to the room. He went to the room and checked. He had already suspected when he was asking me. So he went to the room and checked for my ARVs in my suitcase without even my consent and permission and my medical forms. And he went and ran to the girlfriend and told the girlfriend that I was seducing him to infect him with HIV, even showed him the ARVs that he found in my suitcase. It was very sad for me and very unfortunate, but I had to run away from school. But even before running away from school, I had to sit my friend down and tell her what happened, the whole truth. But I think she was blinded by love, how they say love is blind. You could not listen. So when I ran away from school, and it was not actually my first time running from school, that was my second time, even in my high school. I ran away from school because of the stigma I was facing. But this is campus. And ideally, I think things have changed now, but before you could not just change campus and resume from where you're stopped. So I could not change campus. The situation at home was also not well, so I could not even go and tell my mother that this is what I'm going through. I had to talk to myself. Told myself, Gloria, is your HIV status going to change? No, unless God does a miracle. I'm a Christian as well, but I believe that God gave me a healing, inner healing. You know, the inner healing, but not the physical healing. And I told myself, Gloria, you're a bold person, bold people don't run away from problems. So I had to go back to hostel. And by the time I went back to hostel, everyone had known that this is Gloria who was to infect people's boyfriends, who is HIV positive. It was so tough for me. I had to tell myself, okay, I'll go to school to study. I can tell you that semester I concentrated on my books and I might got the best that semester. But I did not stop there. I got that zeal within me to prove these people wrong. That even though I am HIV positive, I can still be someone in life. I can still be documented to my country. I can still contribute something. So I went in for a beauty pageant after searching online called the White Plus Beauty Pageant. And it's organized by the Ugandan Network of Young People with HIV. And that was 2017. God helped me. I won the crown. And I became the queen. I started representing the voices of young people living with HIV both nationally and internationally. But I also didn't stop there. I went for the bigger crown, the national crown, which is Miss Uganda, which is the biggest pageant in Uganda. And God helped me. I won 2 titles: Miss Uganda, Miss Purpose, and Miss Uganda Rising Woman. And my journey from there has never stopped. We have never looked back. I have inspired over 10,000 young people through my organization, Loyal Justice Foundation, to believe in themselves, to know that having HIV is not the end of life, and HIV does not define them. They can still live healthy lives, happy lives, and positive lives. But I've also been able to work with so many different institutions, Ministry of Health, with Dr. Elena this morning, discussing they're called matters of national importance. To add my voice to matters of national importance. And as I conclude, I have a very small photo slide that I want to share with you for my journey. Of course, growing up with HIV has not been easy. However, my story is one of resilience, transformation, and purpose. Born with HIV through mother-to-child transmission, I grew up facing stigma, discrimination, and moments of deep hopelessness after discovering my status at the age of 11. What began as a journey of fear and self-hate gradually turned into one of courage and empowerment as I learned to accept myself, embrace treatment, and use my voice to advocate for others. Through faith, education, and advocacy, I have transformed my pain into purpose, raising from a young girl who once thought that she had no future to a lawyer that I am today, an HIV advocate and a community leader, inspiring thousands of young people to believe that HIV does not define their work or limit their dreams. And I am now vying for a bigger seat to represent the youth voices in Parliament. Next slide. That is my graduation picture. On the left is my degree. On the right is my postgraduate diploma from the Lord Government Center. So guys, it's very much possible for young people born with HIV to study. I have a degree now, and I keep on encouraging young people out there who are living with HIV that it should not define you, can still achieve your dreams. Next slide, please. That is the birth of my organization, Loyal Justice Foundation, where I've been able to empower over 10,000 young people living unaffected with HIV. Next slide, please. That is part of my advocacy. On the left was at the ICASA 2019 in Kigali. And on the right, that was me in Amsterdam at the International AIDS Conference. Well, I also found love, so it's very much possible. So very much possible for a young lady who's living with HIV or a gentleman to find love. I know it's a very tricky situation when it comes to finding love with a young person born with HIV. Since everyone thinks, for us ladies, people think that just left around get HIV, but it's very much possible. I always encourage young people, know that you're worthy of love. It doesn't matter whether you're positive or not. I found a very handsome, actually told me, I didn't find him. Yes, a very handsome young man called me, and those are some of pictures of my proposal and my introduction. Next slide, please. So I am aiming higher, and as you can see, I am vying to represent the youth voices in Parliament. And I was duly nominated last week at the Electoral Commission to represent the youth voices in Central Region. And I believe that with what I've done through my advocacy, having this platform will help me to enhance voices as young people living with HIV in the national policy making and decision making. And I am here today as a living testimony to show that HIV does nothing on me.
Wow.
Good. As we celebrate the progress made in the fight against HIV, we must not ignore the growing rates posed by the shrinking global funding space. The lives, dreams, and futures of young people living with HIV depend on consistent access to treatment, care, and support. And this requires sustained investment. It is time for governments, the private sector, and local stakeholders to domesticate HIV funding, ensure that our national responses are self-reliant, sustainable, and inclusive. We must prioritize investment in long-term and innovative treatments such as lenacapavir, and I'm happy that the current speaker spoke about lenacapavir. And I'm also happy that we have lenacapavir for treatment, for prevention that was approved, but also need lenacapavir for treatment. Personally, I'm tired of taking medication every day. So if you can have lenacapavir for treatment approved, it will really be great, which will offer hope for better adherence, improved quality of life, and reduce stigma. Together, let us commit to building a future where every person with HIV can access lifelong treatment, live with dignity, and continue to contribute meaningfully to society. Because ending AIDS is not just a global responsibility, it is a national duty. Just like I said earlier, now that I'm aiming higher, I request for everyone's support in this room and on virtual platforms to support me as amplify the voices of young people in parliaments. And anything you can, I am very much humbled to receive it in good faith. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Wow. What an amazing story to end the very first session on this first day of the 17th annual HIV update meeting. And the catchword from that greatly inspiring story is pain into purpose. So as I prepare to hand over to the next session chair, I would like us to do one simple thing. We are over 200 participants on the call. We are going to turn on our cameras and we are going to take pictures. We can still take pictures to document this meeting. So turn on your cameras, give us that widest smile. And I know the IT team will take some pictures for us to document this meeting, even though it's virtual. So Isaac, let us know when you're ready so that we can turn on our smiles.
Sure.
And
we've enabled video, so you should be able to turn on your video. I'll use the QR code what you have so that pictures can be taken as I don't know. Just hold on 1 minute. Let's move on program. Just hold on.
And next time,
Yes, we can take some more just hold on. One more.
okay.
Yes, we are.
So thank you very much, team, for turning on your cameras. Thanks to our very wonderful speakers for the first session. What a great start to this meeting. I'll now hand over to our next session chair, Dr. William Tamale. Over to you, Dr. Tamale.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Elena, for the session. Dr. Elena started her career here at JCRC, and so we are well known to her. She was also 1 year ahead of me at medical school. So on that side, she's my boss. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. William Tamale. I'm the clinic manager here at JCRC. I'm a clinician and also a clinical research investigator in a number of investigations, clinical trials that are happening here. I was so much happy with Gloria's stories. Gloria is campaigning for the youth MP, and you know she's been with us for a very long time, and therefore I request you guys to support her. She has been at the outpatients, and we did our part. So if she comes around, please support her. The youth MP campaigns are quite costly, as you know. I'm not campaigning for her, but I think that's how it is. So when she comes around with a box, please be generous enough. Okay. So for this session, we shall be having 3 speakers. The first speaker has already been introduced, and therefore I will not introduce much about him. After him, we'll have Professor Pontiano Kalebu, who is with us here. And when the time comes, I'll profile him. I'll read his bio. Then we shall also have Dr. Edward Ban. After those speakers, we shall have questions and answers. You can always have your questions in the chat room. We'll be able to read them at the end of the sessions. For the first speaker, Dr. Richard Elliott is going to speak to us about the highlights from the international conferences 2025. That's from CROI, IAS, and Infectious Diseases Conference Glasgow. Remember, we cannot all be there. Therefore, the summaries can always be given to us by Dr. Richard Elliott. So Dr. Richard, you've been introduced. We shall not take time to reintroduce you. If you're online, we can have your talk. Thank you so much.
Well, good morning again. I'm hoping everybody can see my screen. Could you just acknowledge that you're seeing the introductory slide?
Yeah, can see
Very much.
them. Thank you.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to give you a tour of the CROI presentation, one of the major HIV presentations that was done in San Francisco in March. There were a number of treatments that were presented, ranging from prevention, treatment, and complications. This gives you a sense of the scope of the meeting. I'll give you just a few of these, not all of them. First of all, it was one of the first meetings that people who were working for our government were not necessarily able to come to. There were travel funds were suspended. And so we wanted to, first of all, thank all the people from NIH and CDC who did so much hard work. Things are changing now and I hope improving, but there was a lot of adjustments in the beginning. And so many people weren't at the meeting. And I want to just thank people for doing that. And we support these federal workers who've helped to do that, who are hopefully going to be going back to work soon. Start on prevention. The first thing is looking at how much PrEP is utilized. And I'll point out when these studies are done in the United States versus when they're done in other countries. But in the United States, there's a ratio of PrEP to need. So you look at how much new HIV infections there are and rates of infections, and that's the denominator. And then you put how much provision of PrEP there is. And you could show that when there was a higher fraction of that, when more PrEP was delivered, there was a decline in HIV diagnosis. There's a clear population basis that when PrEP is offered, HIV rates decline. But it's very different and very speckled throughout the United States. And better PrEP to need ratio was not always accompanied by narrowing of racial and ethnic disparities. So there might have been changes in a geographical area, but they may not have been afforded to all members of that population, showing that there's unequal access. So we need, as PrEP gets rolled out, especially in Uganda, you need to both look at geographic distributions, but also differences in the population amongst that geography to make sure that there's equality. The second thing, the same kind of thing, as we see PrEP rolling out, we see the people who have greatest access to PrEP get it the most, the people who have the least access to PrEP get it the least. And so these benefits of PrEP are not always going to all of the population. So as PrEP gets developed in Uganda, there's going to have to be efforts to keep track of the populations most at risk and make sure they get that. It's a little different in your country than the United States just because of the way healthcare delivery systems work, but I think the same challenge exists in both countries. And finally, these issues do not always relate to gender, and there has to be specific efforts to gender and to find areas how to reach out to women differently than men. Sometimes the approaches that we use to help provide PrEP might not be the same. There's cultural differences in every part of the United States, let alone in a different country like Uganda, let alone the differences between rural communities in Uganda and in Kampala. So each of these locations is going to have to figure out what's the right cultural blend, what's the right delivery model to be able to reach their population. This is a study looking at a healthcare system in the United States looking at long-acting PrEP. And the idea was to see, well, how much are people doing it? How much is there? And this is the cumulative number, and you can see that patients started out of 23,000 in the first year of when PrEP was available, less than 1% of the population started it. And this is an environment where cost was not the issue. So this is an environment where this was an insurance plan that people's drugs are covered. And it goes to show you that even with new developments where financing wasn't even an issue, PrEP was slow to roll out. There were different provisions necessary to provide injectables, and we can talk about those in the Q&A. But there, so the ability to deliver injectable PrEP, and as Dr. Fauci alluded to, is still an implementation challenge, and not it is improving, but it's I don't think it's at the point where it's equal access as it is to orals, where the people would feel the same way about it. When you look at who were the CAB LA users, there were people who were slightly older. They were, interestingly enough, more likely to be Black or Hispanic populations that are usually at risk, and they were more likely to have had a bacterial STI or have hypertension. So, in other words, there's some evidence that people were making an effort to reach out to people who maybe they thought would not necessarily traditionally, historically, weren't people who had the most adherence or people who weren't using condoms coming back and forth. And so initial efforts were made to these populations, communities at risk that people thought might need injectables to get over the hurdle of adherence challenges. But still, uptake was low, less than 1%. Um, The good news is 75% of people stayed on PrEP after 1 year. And one of the things with long-acting cabotegravir, when you discontinue it, you have to continue oral PrEP because the long-acting cab stays in the blood for at least 6 to 8 months. And so you need to have an oral protection Otherwise, as the drug wanes over time, there's a point where the drug is no longer preventive, but it's still present. So HIV infection could develop and resistance could develop to the class of integrase. So it's recommended that oral PrEP be used when a person discontinues injectable PrEP. And that wasn't done that often. That being said, there were no HIV infections among the cabotegravir users, and only about a third had oral PrEP prescribed. And so you can see that there was both a provider challenge as well as a patient challenge to do that. But at the same time, fortunately, there was no negative consequences from that. That's not a reason not to do it. That's, I think, the lower numbers. I think as time rolls out, there will be people who convert after they discontinue if they don't take oral PrEP. So it's an important lesson to learn from our experience. When we look at long-acting PrEP in clinical settings, here's a study looking at 200 patients who were on it. They stayed on it for 73% stayed on it, and there were no HIV acquisitions. There are numerous studies that will look at the persistence of PrEP over time, and the numbers will run anywhere from 75 to 85% in the States. I'll bet it will be better in Uganda because you all have better adherence usually to medications than our own studies. At least that's been reported in the literature. So it might be better, and it'd be interesting to hear during the Q&A if that's the case. Um, this is an interesting study because it relates to what tests we should use to screen. So in this study, HB10084, it compared long-acting CAB and oral TDF-TC in cisgender women. And so we know that long-acting CAB, if was given to people who had actual occult infection, it could delay the detection. And so because of that, it was always recommended to be screening these people with HIV RNA. This has been a real challenge in countries like Uganda or Rwanda or Kenya because the costs of these lab tests are much higher for HIV RNA than they would be for just an antigen test, or if you have access to an antigen antibody test, excuse me, an antibody test, or if you have access to an antigen antibody test. But there still is a concern about how necessary is it to have to use RNA tests because we know they're valuable. And in this study, you can see that of the people who were able to take a choice, what they wanted, oral or injectable, close to 80% continued to choose. But they got these RNA tests at each visit. And so the question is, how well is that RNA test working? And the attributes of a good screening test. It should be able to benefit the balance of early treatment for those with undetected infection versus the harm to those who don't need treatment. So you don't want an RNA test that's going to be falsely positive and somehow get contaminated because that would suggest to people that they're HIV positive when in fact they're not. The false negatives would be the people who get a negative test, but it's not detecting early infection. So the needs have to balance the challenges of those two clinical situations. So it should have high sensitivity. In other words, when it identifies something, it must be very accurate and have a high positive predictive value to accurately predict the presence. But at the same time, it should have a clear cutoff so that negative tests are clear and positive tests are clear. And it should be reasonably priced and widely available. We can make an argument that in Uganda that's not the case, that it's not so easy to do this. Even in the United States, it's widely available, but it's not always reasonably priced. And for some patients, this is an issue. So these investigators wanted to look and see, well, what was the predictive value of an RNA test? And they looked at 2,500 participants, and 4% got an HIV positive test. So 88% of them, even despite a positive test, were seen to not have HIV. 3% couldn't get determined, and 8 of them were confirmed. So that means there was a fair amount of false of tests that you couldn't confirm. 90% of the tests you couldn't confirm. So HIV RNA in this setting, to summarize things, performed poorly in detecting HIV infections in people on LICAV because of the incidence of infection is low and the sensitivity of a test is high. It will find things that represent contaminants or lab error that are going to be greater than the actual rate of infections occurring. It's not always the same. If there were like lots of infections, then a more sensitive test would be more helpful. But in a setting of people on PrEP, because that's when we're talking about doing this testing, it's not that common. Therefore, there was a 75% false positive rate. And this was worse after people were on them a long time. And so, for this reason, the current recommendation of including HIV RNA should be reconsidered. This was big news at PrEP because this was something that everybody was doing. Dr. Sali and I have talked about the accessibility of HIV RNA for a number of years. And this test was the first time it said, well, maybe you don't need it. And that was a big deal. Finally, looking at lab testing to looking at what kind of STI testing was done and what kind of routine testing. And you can see that you're supposed to test everybody, but among two different groups, among oral PrEP users, only about 40% got testing. And among long-acting PrEP, only got half of them got testing. So even in a place where lab testing is universally available, you have high rates of providers or patients who aren't complying with that. Finally, there was a very exciting study on lenacapavir. Lenacapavir is a long-acting antiretroviral. It's a capsid inhibitor, and it's currently approved in the United States. And I know they're trying to get it on to access into Uganda, but it can be given every 6 months. And originally, it was done as a medicine for treatment, but they wanted to compare PrEP, the use of this formulation for prevention, not just in treatment. And so there are two different doses, looking at it every 6 months. The demographics of the people who came into it in this testing are listed here. And the bottom line, I'm sorry, this was looking at the once yearly versus twice yearly. They were able to show that lenacapavir, which has already been shown to be beneficial here in the pink, every 6 months, the once yearly dose, which was a higher dose, double the dose that was given, was just about as good. And it stayed well above the level that you see in the dotted lines here of people who would get infections in both groups. So this was exciting news because this perhaps meant that for the first time we could have a yearly injection, almost like a vaccine. Now, Dr. Deeks is going to talk about vaccinations, and we'll see how long and frequent vaccinations have to be. But for the first time, we start to see the ability already available as an every 6 month, but this would be available as a once yearly injection, certainly making administration and for populations much easier. If, big if the cost can be addressed and if there's funds to pay for this. Well, what's involved when you get it? There are some injection reactions. This is looking at how much it hurts, different formulations. It hurts more in the beginning. Ice improves it. You can see by it lasts about a week. And so the question is, will this be an issue for people? Do injection site reactions affect whether people will find this usable or advisable to take? Time will tell. I'm going to switch gears now and just focus on sexual health because the use of, and I remember talking about this with you guys a few years ago, the use of doxycycline. We know that doxycycline can be very effective about preventing gonorrhea and syphilis. And so we wanted to look at in populations that this has now been rolled out, what's been happening. So here's two studies, one in DC where I live, and this is a cohort that the Department of Health and GW has put together that Amanda Castell ran, and of over 1,500 people who are HIV positive, who are MSM or transgender with an STI in the previous years, only 4% had gotten doxypep. In San Francisco, you had a small number as well. So even though, and you can see here in San Francisco, there might have been a lot of people who started on it. 60% got it prescribed, a third of them got initiated, but only 1 in 5 adhered to it. In DC, it was less than 10%. In San Francisco, it was 1 in 5. So aren't staying on it. It's post-exposure prophylaxis. You take it after you've had an unsafe sexual encounter, but we know that it works well in men. The data is not as clear in women, but whether it's being utilized is a different story. Okay, we're going to switch to treatment. I'm going to be doing talks on prevention and treatment in subsequent days, doing a whole session on each of these. But right now, I'm just focusing on the advances that we're seeing at CROI. The first is in terms of how much are people doing in long-acting ART. This is a study from the OPERA cohort. It was 100 clinics in the United States, and they looked at close to 2,900 patients who had multiple injections. And you can see here the virologic outcomes were excellent. 95% of the people at their last viral load, 83% were staying on. There was probably about a 15 or 17% drop off, but very few failures. So this is in a population of all comers, of people in clinic settings. These drugs were working really well in terms of viral loads, and close to 85% of the patients are staying engaged. This is a study from UCSF that looks at the same thing, high rates of viral suppression. So just showing you different data to show the same thing. Now, why do people discontinue? Here's about a 16% rate at the clinic at University of California, San Francisco. Why? And you can see here that the largest group is injection site reactions. Of the 69, close to half of those, 38 of them, have reasons for stopping the injections because of local reactions. The rest are a variety of issues. 8 is people who can't even comply with doing something every 2 months. A few virologic failures, but infrequent. So the biggest reason why people stop, though, is injection-related issues related to the pain of the injection. There are some concerns that there could be differences in injection site reactions with the other injectable coming out now, lenacapavir compared to cabotegravir, and that it could be worse with lenacapavir. I think that the data is not clear on that yet. More data has to be accumulated, but we'll see. But we should be cautious to think that just because things are injectable, everyone's going to like them. If they have a reaction to it, they are not necessarily going to be wanting to continue. Let's look at the CARE study, a study that your own Sissy Kityo is the primary investigator and developed this study along with the ACTG. This was a very important study that looks at people coming in on therapy who are already suppressed. Viral loads are less than 50. They're either on TDF and 3-TC or FTC plus DTG, nevirapine, or efavirenz. Not all, just one of those three. And they've never had failure, and they come in already suppressed. They're able to either go on to their oral, stay on their regimen, or switch over to CAB RPV. They get viral loads every 24 weeks, and there were different things saved to see how they did if they got resistance. The data, you can see where the people came from and the distribution. What's interesting here is that there were different amounts of people who came in with resistance, even though they weren't supposed to. 7% of the population came in with rilpivirine resistance, even though these people were not supposed to have had virologic failure. So was it transmitted and it was just a drug related, or did they have failure and we didn't know it when they came in? All of these things are going to happen. The same thing with CAB RNA. They had resistance to integrase mutations. Despite that, look at the virologic success. Close to 97% of both the oral standard of care as well as the injectable regimen. So in a setting where perhaps people didn't have a long track record of laboratory tests, or maybe even the tests weren't done religiously, even though it was a study and they should have been, the success rate was really superb. So it tells you that for people, it tells you two things. Number one, for people who enter studies, if you're on oral regimens, you keep taking your pills. You're adherent. You're being watched. But it also tells you that if you were on them and you switch to injectables, it works really well, equally well. The participants with virologic failure, and there were few, only 4 of them. This gives you a sense of what they were. You can see the presence of either a rilpivirine mutation, more likely, and sometimes a integrase mutation as well. And when you look at the things on baseline, One of them had a very low level of a cabotegravir mutation, but not all of them. And the viral subtypes were different. There are subtypes that exist in Africa that are different than the ones we have in the United States. They were previously in the clinical investigation reported more failures with certain subtypes that wasn't seen in this study. I believe Dr. Mutaluza was one of our speakers today, or is one of our speakers. So this is they should be presenting this study, not me. So let's go on to other regimens. So despite the advances in single tablet ARV regimens, as Dr. Fauci alluded to, and despite the advances of uh, long-acting injectables, there's still work going on in terms of once daily oral regimens. This study looks at two different medicines. One is doravirine, which is a second generation non-nucleoside. So in other words, it works in the presence of traditional mutations that would have made nevirapine or efavirenz not successful. And it's paired with islatravir. Islatravir is a nucleoside reverse transcriptase translocation inhibitor. So it's a different kind of drug. And this drug was found in higher doses to cause decreases in white count. So they switched the dose that it could be used for, and it was paired with doravirine. So it was a two-drug regimen given once a day. And so the question was, does it work as well as other regimens? And the bottom line was, yes, it did. It's compared to bictegravir, FTC, and TAF. You have non-significant differences. There were two failures. The rates of failures in the two were more or less similar, but the rates were non-inferior. So this establishes islatravir as a useful second drug, and establishes doravirine as islatravir as a possible single tablet two-drug regimen. That would be in addition to dolutegravir and 3-TC that are as the only oral two-drug regimens. One of the concerns with doravirine was there any decline in lymphocyte or CD4 counts? And there was not. The other was the question of weight gain, because you didn't have TDF or TAF in the regimen, each of which are thought to somehow affect weight. It was curious to see how it would compare to bictegravir, where TAF has been associated with weight gain, especially in Africa. And the bottom line was there was no difference in the two-drug regimen, suggesting that maybe our way of looking at TDF or TAF specifically as an agent related to weight gain wasn't the case, because here, in a regimen that contained no TAF or TDF, there was comparable weight gain in patients who started. So, interesting study. The next combination was looking at a different combination. This was taking the drug lenacapavir that we talked about before that can be given subcutaneously, but they created an oral formulation so that it could be given once a week. The last regimen I showed you, islatravir and doravirine, was once a day. This regimen is a pill once a week. The idea being that there is a very large group of patients, and we know this from patient surveys, that find a once a week pill preferable to every 2 or every 4 or even an every 6 month injection. They don't like needles. They don't want to come into clinics to get their treatments. If they can do a once a week pill, they can do that in their own home and in the privacy of their home, and they prefer that. So this study was addressed to give them something to be able to use. So it was islatravir, that agent I just talked about, with oral lenacapavir. So this was people who came in, they had to be already suppressed, and they went on to one or the other, and then in the extensions phase, everybody went on to lenacapavir. Excuse me, yeah, lenacapavir. And what you can see here is that the viral loads were quite comparable. There was some pre-existing resistance in these patients, but most of them were able to suppress. One of the islatravir lenacapavir participants had viremia, but he was able to resuppress. So this establishes potentially this two-drug once weekly oral regimen as an alternative to long-acting injectables or to once daily oral regimens. So that was exciting news. Other new antiretrovirals are Merck has a second long-acting NRTTI similar to islatravir. This drug is being used primarily in PrEP, but a little bit in oral treatment as well. But in PrEP, it would be once a month. So now you're starting to see you have daily PrEP pills. This would be potentially a monthly PrEP pill, again, letting people keep that autonomy, the ability to take pills, not have to go into clinics, not have to be seen. A popular regimen suggested by as much as a third of the population in surveys. And then finally, you still have long actings for those who want 2 or every 4 months or every 6. VH184 is a long-acting integrase that can be given much longer than every 2 to 4 months as cabotegravir is, and so there's research continuing in that area. Let's look at some of the issues about aging and comorbidities. Dr. Fauci pointed out how the lifespan of an HIV person who's 21 is expanded up to 56, which is amazing considering the challenges we had earlier. But if you're a 56-year-old and you get to and you're hearing all this, you want to know, how does this affect my aging? How does my other diseases affected by living with HIV? And so this part of the talk is intended to look at that. We know that for weight, and there's a big debate about that. I'm not going to go through all of the studies, but there's been work in Africa and the United States suggesting that the initiation of medication is associated with gains in weight. They've done extensive studies to look at this to see if agents are associated with this. And I presented a treatment. And then we did a further study to look at that. And in fact, the weight gains were less due to regimens and more due to various aspects of the demographics of the population. So there's still ongoing work to figure this out. And CROI certainly looked at those kind of challenges. One of the studies that looked at that was Paso Doble, because they compared people who switched to a 2-drug regimen versus a 3-drug regimen. So because of that, you can look at changes in weight. And what they found was that the people who were on the 3-drug regimen gained about 1.8 kilos, they gained about a kilo more after a year than the people on DTG3TC. So there's still ongoing conversation about this. There's a study that shows a small amount of change related to TAF over a year. Other studies haven't verified that. When they looked at weight gain at greater than 5%, it was definitely, you can see here that a higher percentage of the people varied by the pre-switch NRTI and was most prevalent in those switching from TDF. And there the thought was that TDF causes a little bit of nausea and is weight suppressant. So the regimen you go on after that is not necessarily causing weight gain. It's the removal of the agent that made you a little nauseous or made you a little something that you didn't eat as much, and that's why you gained weight. When you look at this overall in populations, those differences start to wash out. Hypertension. There's been a talk that with integrases, there's increased rates of hypertension. The OPERA cohort looked at over 10,000 patients and did not find any association of increased hypertension with regimens. Diabetes. NA Accord, a large cohort of cohorts, wanted to see if there was a signal of agents that could be causing diabetes, because we know as people gain weight who are HIV positive, they have more risk of diabetes. And here there was a study that was presented in 2016 to 2022 where you had a 22% increase in risk ratios of people who switched to an integrase. And when you tried to look at that, most with L-Vitegravir, but that could be related more to the booster than to the agent itself. But when you compared INSTIs and non-nukes or PIs over a 5-year period, there was not a difference in rates of diabetes. So we're not seeing drug-associated increases in diabetes over time. Finally, the REPRIEVE trial looked at landmark studies showed that the use of statins, independent from the risk of lipids, so not if your cholesterol is high or your lipids are high, but if you're HIV positive, the use of this helped decrease the risk of coronary disease and of non-calcified coronary plaque. And so there were a lot of analysis to go, wow, how did that do that? Because in the past, it's only been associated by lowering lipids. Here's a study to suggest that it operated through some other mechanism because these people didn't have higher lipids. And those studies showed, in this one, where they looked at physical function impairment and frailty, they showed that the risk of decline was greater in those with depression, who were higher BMIs, had pre-existing functional impairment or had higher levels of hsCRP or IL-6, meaning they had higher levels of inflammation. In Uganda, you have concomitant infections and various kind of infections that can cause increases in this rate of inflammation. So the idea is to cut back on any rate of inflammation because anything that causes more inflammation will increase the risk for frailty. And frailty is definitely associated with higher morbidity and higher mortality. Mpox. So we know that right around the time of Croy, there was a global emergency over a new Mpox outbreak. We know that in Africa, this was sort of, really? You're telling us about Mpox? We've been dealing with this for a long time. But in the United States, it was a big deal. And there was a lot of work quickly to know how to ramp up the provision of a vaccine, and there was one available, versus treatment. So this looked at treatment with the use of, I can't pronounce it, tocovirimat for Mpox clade 2. And the bottom line was there was no difference. We didn't find an effective treatment. Vaccines work well, but treatments did not. This one looked at, and I just said this already. This was a study on the Jineo smallpox vaccine to look at this, and you can see that how long would this duration exist and whether HIV positive people would have a different response. And it appears that it lasts at least over 2 years, low rates, and these antibodies persisted for 2 years more, and that people with HIV have a more rapid decline in antibodies post-vaccination. Now, whether that decline in antibodies is still enough to offer protection, that data is unclear, but antibodies do persist over 2 years. That is the end of my presentation. I know that I don't know if we have time for a Q&A now or if it's later, but I want to thank you guys for your attention, and I'll give back to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Group will be forcing them. But for now, yeah, please. Edie wants to have a question with you. So
Thanks, Richard, for that very informative overview of what is trending today. You did talk about access to long-acting carb for PrEP. And I think I did present something last year at Croy, or was it this year? And because I read around, it seems even when you may have long-acting PrEP available in the US, the access and the insurance issues is much more difficult than low and middle income countries, where we are right now. Some countries we are going to start rolling out then come next year, and the rollout for us might even be much faster. That's a comment, maybe.
Yeah, that would be fantastic, Sissy. I think your point is well taken. One of the studies I showed that of the population eligible in the first year or two was only 1%. When we look at overall US rates, it's certainly under 5%, 7%. So the vast majority of people are not accessing long-acting injectables. There are certainly multiple impediments in the healthcare delivery system that leads to that. It's cost is an issue. You have to purchase the drug. Clinics don't necessarily stock it. So there's a delay, and sometimes people don't want to wait for the delay. Sometimes people don't want to come into clinic, so there has to be mobile programs. Where I work at Whitman Walker, there's a mobile program that goes out to people's homes. I think each community is going to have to figure out their own way of solving that particular issue. But in the United States right now, we have not solved that problem. It's still an ongoing issue.
Okay, maybe you will learn from us when you start rolling out.
We're always learning from you.
So the other question is about you talked about patients stopping the long-acting PrEP and that they should start oral. in our experience here in the PrEP programs, taking oral PrEP, when patients start, they very quickly drop down. The percentage that persists even for 12 months drops down very fast. And it also drops down very low. And also in the PrEP program, unlike treatment, when clients come for PrEP, we don't have to insist and look for them when they stop coming, because it's up to their risk. You know, I could say, I had risk at this point. I don't have risk at that point, so I don't need to come. So I don't know if you have any data on clients who have stopped PrEP and then develop because of the long tail. That's why they should continue to take oral, which is not practical and not feasible. Whether there is been development of resistance, even now as you implement and roll out. And
So
then my last question.
wait, hold on.
let
Wait
me
a second.
give-
Let me answer that first one because it had three parts. So I'll forget the answer if I go to your next question. So with the issue of people who start and don't continue, this is an issue for oral PrEP and it's an issue for people who inject and then need oral PrEP. And we know that of the people who start PrEP and then discontinue, and they do that because we call that seasons of activity. They're not sexually active, so they don't want to continue. Despite their understanding that and changing their dosing regimen, we know that people who start and stop have a much higher rate of new infections than of the general population. So even though they say, I'm not sexually active, there's still more sexual activity than they might be aware of. I mean, they're aware of it, but rather they might be not acknowledging that when they stop PrEP. So it's a tricky issue because the patient doesn't want to take it, they're not going to take it. Number two, for people who think they're having sporadic relations, not all of them want to take long-acting PrEP because of the issue about the tail. Because short-acting PrEP can be given, it can stop, you can not do it, and gives you more flexibility. So for some people, therefore, they don't choose injectable PrEP. And then finally, the question about how many people are actually breaking through, because most people who stop injectable PrEP aren't going on to oral PrEP, which I think is true. And the bottom line is we're seeing very few infections. It's still a concern. It's still on the label. We're still worried about it. There have been a few infections, but we're talking less than 5%. Dr. Salih's raising his hand. Yes, Dr. Salih.
You had a question.
Two very quick ones. You talked about HIV RNA performance, and that is really worrying. As we roll out, first of all, we have to screen people before we give them the long-acting PrEP, and then even when they come back for other visits, we still need to screen them. So what is the algorithm? Also in the room here, we have Professor Kalego, and his institution is the one working on these diagnostics and algorithms. What are we going to do as we roll out? And the last quick question is, it is very exciting about the once-a-year lenacapavir. Do you see a companion drug for PrEP? Of course, we don't need another drug, but for treatment, we need another drug. Do you see a companion drug that is coming closely to be used with the lens? Thank you.
My pleasure. Great questions. So first of all, let's go to see, I forgot a little bit the first part of the question about about HIV RNA testing. Well, this is a problem. This is a challenge. But I want to make a distinction between the use of RNA testing to bring people into PrEP versus using RNA testing when people are on PrEP. The use of RNA testing to get entry to be sure that someone is HIV negative is critically important and remains critically important. Regular testing will not detect infections that occur in the 3 weeks or so before a person comes in. Since a lot of people who come in for PrEP are having frequent sexual encounters, it's common to have someone who had sex in the 3 weeks before they come in for a visit to have had an exposure. Therefore, it's really important to both have a clinical judgment to recognize acute infection, which will probably catch maybe 60–70% of the infections, but it still leaves a group that's going to be an occult infection that you wouldn't know. For those patients, the use of RNA testing, I think, is fundamental and very important. However, once people start PrEP, the question about how to monitor if they're still staying uninfected is, I think, an open question. It's not an open question about using RNA testing before, but once they're on, I think it is an open question. And I think there the use of the test has to be combined with clinical judgment. Did you miss things? Did you miss doses? Were you late in getting your injections? There might be times where you've got to suspend treatment for a period of a week or two, get RNA testing when they're in between one of those breaks, but not always useful if they're on long-acting injectables. But the use of clinical judgment, but the use of RNA testing in the setting where people are already on long-acting PrEP. We know that anytime you have a test that has a fairly high sensitivity, with a low incidence event, the risk of false positives, in other words, where it's going to say a test is positive, but in fact you don't have a positive test, is a high risk. And this was what was found for that study. So I think the future research is going to point to what's the best way to monitor those on PrEP, not what test to do before, but to monitor while on. Your second question, what would be the spouse of lenacapavir? And I'd say that's a big effort is underway to figure that out. There's been the use of long-acting blocking antibodies. I don't put much faith in that. They're going to be expensive. They'll require a screening test. I don't think they'll last for a year. It's going to be longer acting drugs or different methods of delivering drugs. So there are now like subcutaneous reservoirs that are being put in that could extend the life. And so we may see some combination of lenacapavir and some other way of administering the drug. The integrase I showed you is intended to be every 6 months. So I do think it's a question of time till that develops. But in the meantime, we may see the use of delivery systems instead of new formulations as a way to provide a partner for lenacapavir.
My question was quite similar to CC. I wanted some clarification on the testing around what's the current formulation in the US. How are you testing with what method? How frequently, especially with the long-acting formulation?
So I pretty much follow the guidelines. I'm very aggressive about testing when I start. And if I'm not sure, I'm not going to start. And I'll wait while they're not on treatment. And granted, that's a risk, but I'm going to wait and really make sure. My biggest goal is making sure I don't put positive people on the PrEP. So I'll be very judicious through clinical judgment, through delaying things, through getting multiple tests. The second thing, that RNA test starts to increase in its specificity when you get two, a week or two apart. So that's one way to kind of get around that false positive rate. So initially, if I'm not sure, I'm going to wait, do another test a week after. That's how I screen who gets in. In terms of screening while they're on, I don't have a good answer for you, Francis. We're doing we can get access to antigen antibody tests that are rapid, but we're not doing a lot of RNA PCRs anymore. And you and I have talked about that a lot and the importance of that. But this study, which was very influential, done by Rafi Landesman, who was the original investigator on the HPTN studies that looked at this, he's very convinced that the use of this as a monitoring tool is not that useful. And so we're trying to find different ways to do that, meaning that we'll get multiple tests to see if they concur. Sometimes we'll wait and we'll see what the history is, and that will focus how we do that. You have to not, you can't just have a blanket approach. Each patient has to be individualized.
Now, as you wait to get sure on whether the patient somebody should receive the long acting, they have some risk of exposure. What do you give them in the interim?
I'm sorry, I didn't
Yes,
understand. If they're starting prep or treatment.
Prep, this is we're using long acting prep.
You mean, are there risk factors that if they told me about, I wouldn't give them long acting?
Because you're going to test them before you give them the long acting, and the testing algorithm may take a while. And in a place like ours where we have many young people, or people can get, there's a risk of exposure, which we could lose days, opportunities of going to them. Would you use an oral strategy in the interim as you add them for the negotiable?
I think that's an interesting idea. I don't think that's been tested, but we do that. So a lot of times, if someone wants to start prep, if someone comes in who's very high risk, we'll get them tested. We might start them an oral, and then we'll wait for the test to come back. So one approach is to get one test, give them an oral lead-in, not of cabotegravir, but of TDF and 3-TC, because I know you have that available, and we'd wait and watch that. That would be a very viable strategy. I think it's also viable, and that you have to individualize this, to say, well, if someone comes in and they have any history of an acute HIV conversion, any flu-like illness, any kind of rash, any kind of intercurrent symptoms of in the 3 weeks before they come in, I'm not going to give them prep at that point. I'm going to wait. I'm going to maybe get a test a week out. And I'm going to definitely, there's a risk because during that time, I'm not giving them prep. When they come in for prep, I'm consciously not giving them prevention when they're asking for prevention. That's not always a good strategy. But we have to weigh the downside and benefits of that strategy versus treating them giving them prep when they're actually in conversion. So in those situations, I'm going to make clinical judgments about waiting. Certainly in someone like that, I'm not going to start them on long acting. I'm going to wait till that acute syndrome has passed. The real conundrum is that 30% that don't present with acute seroconversion, who could have a cult infection, who said, yeah, I had unprotected relation 10 days ago, and they come in and they want prep. There's no great answer for that. I think in those settings, I personally am using oral agents for a month or two and then switching them over to long-acting injectables. But I just feel safer doing that. Great questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. William. Yeah, there's a question here from Francis Senyonjo. He asks, is there a study already in Uganda for twice a year injectable lenacapavir for treatment? I think the lenacapavir we're dealing with is PrEP, and we have studies on injectable PrEP tomorrow. So I think that will be answered. We don't have yet lenacapavir for treatment. And the question here maybe for you, Dr. Elliott, is Zlatavir and lenacapavir, doesn't it require resistance profile first before giving it? That's the question.
For lenacapavir, and what was the first drug?
Ignore the first one, but the second one is Zlatavir and lenacapavir. Does it require resistance profile first
No.
before giving it?
I mean, think about it. These drugs are for islatravir, there's very little resistance to it because it's a unique target. And the same thing applies to lenacapavir, which is even more of a unique target. So there's no testing currently that is even available to look at resistance, but the prevalence and as well as the incidence of the development of mutations that would cause resistance is so low that it's not necessary to test for those.
Then Relatedly, when the blood transfusion services testing donated blood, are they using RNA testing or antibody testing?
It's a good question. I don't know what's done in Uganda, and I think in the United States they use an antigen antibody test, so it's a combined test, and so it's not a PCR test, but it's a different technology for detecting antigen. That will detect it in the first 2 weeks, but not in the first 7 days. But I think that there's a big cost difference between those tests, and I don't know for sure if they're using PCR or if they're just using antigen antibodies.
And
Just so you all know, there will be further discussion about treatment and prevention later. I'm happy to answer these questions, but if you have questions that we don't get to now, feel free to know that there's other sessions coming. You can ask them, but please proceed.
yeah. Dr. Frank Rain has a question, but he has not written it down. I don't know what question he has. Can you hear us? Frank? Frank Rain.
Frank isn't shy. We'll let him speak maybe.
Yeah. Okay, you'll probably ask it. I think that's it for now. Let's move on around. Okay. Thank you so much.
I
Oh wait,
found
here's Dr. Rain. Yes,
Yeah,
Frank.
so I wanted to make a point about the Lanowitz study about monitoring with viral loads. Most of the false positive viral loads were less than 500, and most of the true positives were above 500. So there is a way of sorting it out. I'm not a fan of doing it. It's too expensive. The question I wanted to ask was, how are we going to do this how are we going to monitor patients on lenacapavir for PrEP? And I'll tell you the answer we've decided on for now and ask you how you want to do that. We're not going to check the lenacapavir patients. We're not going to monitor them at all for infection because it's so good unless we find they've had an STD. If they've had an STD, then we will test them for HIV infection.
I mean, first of all, Frank's point about the height of the viral load is really important, and I'm glad you mentioned that because the false positive rate declines markedly when the value of the test is higher. So that is an important qualifier, and I appreciate you mentioning that, Frank. In terms of lenacapavir, boy, I don't know. I don't think that's a good way to do it, what you just said, because there's going to be a lot of STIs. And how do you know that the test you're going to use is going to be useful in that situation? We also don't have enough knowledge yet because there's been so few breakthrough infections about what level of viremia they'll be, how accurate these tests will be, and what they'll mean. So a negative test might not be as comforting as you want it to be. So I think that's an open question that we don't have an answer yet.
Okay, thank you so much. We're going to leave it at that so that we give a chance to the next speaker. Thank you so much, Dr. William. And the next speaker is the director of Uganda Virus Research Institute, UVRI. He holds a medical degree from Makerere University, a diploma in immunology, and PhD from the University of London. He has served on several committees, including WHO HIV Vaccine Advisory Committee, the Global HIV Vaccine Enterprise Coordinating Committee, the UNAIDS Science Panel, the AIDS Vaccine Advisory Coalition Board, the NIAID HIV/AIDS Clinical Trials Strategic Working Group, and was chair for the African AIDS Vaccine Program, AFVP. He leads a number of national and regional networks. He is a Uganda's representative of the EDCTP General Assembly. He chairs the Uganda AIDS Commission Technical Committee, the National HIV Drug Resistance Technical Working Group under the Ministry of Health, and a member of the National Antiretroviral Treatment Committee. His main research interests include HIV vaccine research, especially understanding protective immune responses, HIV diversity and resistance to antiretroviral therapy. He has authored many research articles, books related to health sciences, medicine, and surgery. You are most welcome, Professor Pontiano Alebo. Give it up.
Thank you very much. So I don't have the slides in front of me. I've been informed that I'll be saying next. So don't keep me bored of my next. First of all, I thank you for inviting me to give this presentation. And I'm very happy that this is taking place. Thank you for maintaining it. It's not easy. And I've been part of these meetings over the years. And thank you for not forgetting me. So can you put the slides? Next. Slideshow. Okay, next. So I'll talk about HIV virology. I was requested, and that is my outline. CROI updates. I was not in CROI. I have to say that. I tried to scan yesterday and the other day, so that I'm also look up here a bit updated. But I missed CROI. I attended IIS, but a few sessions where I was invited. I'll give you some updates on our virology research at UVRI and MRC. PrEP-VAC is the last efficacy trial we conducted, which I was co-leading. I'll tell you more about the next steps and the updates on the germline targeting experimental vaccine trials and the conclusion next. Many of you here, I'm sure, basic science sessions you don't go. Track A, where a lot of the HIV virology, viral replication, host restriction, viral cycle, entry, tropism, phenotype, a lot of that is normally in the track A, I think, of CROI. I hope it is still next. And yesterday I was trying to check, and I enjoyed this webcast by Professor Stewart, Neil Stewart from King's College, who gave some presentations on what to expect and all the presentations on virology that were in CROI next. And I will not go into the details, but I have a few slides just to tell you that there's a lot that was presented on HIV replication, especially the issue of HIV integration and the capsid, because these are quite important areas. Capsid, as you know, is quite important now. Now we have drugs that really work, and capsid, which we never had many years ago, but a lot of work has been done on the capsid formation, but also in integration and the reservoir, because this will be quite important if we are talking about HIV cure. So there's anybody wants to learn a little bit more, you can really go on with the webcast and learn a little bit more of what to place in CROI next time. Again, there was a lot on the cycle of the virus, entry and all that, and different areas. And of course, many times these presentations don't make a lot of news when the results of the Lenacapavir are being presented. But this is the engine where really discovery is taking place that will lead us into intervention years to come. The basic virology to understand, and it's very impressive what has been done really to understand the virus to this stage. I think what is left is really to understand this integration and how we can really keep out this virus from the cell. So there was quite some good virology that was presented in CROI by different investigators. Next. Drug resistance. Dr. Francis Sally will talk about drug resistance, so I'll not go into that. But as you know, it's also very important, especially as we start rolling out these long-acting. Now we are still beginning to see some resistance to some of the integrase. So I think I'll leave that out. But there was bits here and there, go back, on broadly neutralizing antibodies in CROI. But because I was shortly said, these are coming up. The reason I brought this up, the broadly neutralizing antibodies, I think a lot of the advances in this area has been because of the HIV vaccine research to try to find out which areas of the HIV can induce these broadly neutralizing antibodies that can help us really prevent infection. But now, before we have a prophylactic vaccine, they're being used in the combination, either with the PrEP, but also they're coming up in long-term treatment. Next, and there were a few presentations next that we're talking about. Next, talking about using some of these. There's, I think, an earlier slide there. Before that. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, broadly neutralizing antibodies. And they're being used in the combination with the treatment and with the aim of really, if you can have the treatment and these antibodies, probably you can suppress, but also probably you can address the reservoir. So I think it will be interesting to see how these, if we in vaccines, how they're being used in combination with treatment. There were a few presentations in CROI on this, and it will be interesting to follow up and see whether we can even do some treatment interruption in people who have been given these broadly neutralizing antibodies. Next, there were also interesting areas on therapeutic vaccines. Therapeutic in those individuals who are already HIV infected, especially using the T-cell approach, and those who are on treatment, again to address this cure. How can we really suppress the virus, and how can we attack infected cells, and how can we attack the viral reservoir? So I think there's some interesting studies that are coming up using therapeutic T-cell vaccines in people who are suppressing, and we shall see how this really comes up as we go. Next, treatment and long-acting PrEP. Again, there were studies that were looking at broad and neutralizing antibodies. That particular one, which I think is targeting the CD4 binding region, and studies were showing that you can maintain very good viral suppression. Those who are on long-acting treatment and use these antibodies. This one has been produced by VIF. Next. How about some of the work we are doing? And briefly in a few slides, I will give you some of the work that have relevance to what I've just given you, especially neutralizing antibodies. We need to be careful. We may be left behind if we don't work to ensure that the antibodies that are being developed to how they fare with our viruses. And we have colleagues, Sheila Balinda is one of those who was your staff here, who has done some good work on transmitted founder viruses. Next, to characterize them. And what we see in this figure just shows you the type of viruses that we have. She has looked at historical viruses that were collected years back and newer viruses. And what we can see is an increase in recombinant viruses. Viruses are coming, we are seeing more and more of these recombinant viruses. Next. And what is the implication of these viruses? And there are a few studies that I will show you that show to us that our viruses may be a little bit different from subtype B and C that are commonly presented when they're developing some of these products. One of them is sensitivity to interferon inhibitors, which can be used to inhibit the virus. As you can see here, the HIV on the graph, this work is published, but on your left, you can see that individuals who have recombinant viruses compared to those who don't have recombinant viruses, they're a little bit more resistant to interferon. So if interferon is used in any way to modify immune responses, viruses are a little bit, especially those that are IgG resistant, more resistant to interferon. Next. They are also, when you look at on your right, this is co-receptor usage. We all know other viruses use CCR5, then later you use XCR4 or duotropism. But what we are finding, even in our other viruses, they already start using the XCR4. So that has an effect if you are going to use some of these drugs that inhibit the CCR5 the receptor, because you already have a lot of these viruses. That is something we have seen before. Even when I was doing my PhD, it was one of my topics to look at this and subtype D and all that. But we're seeing more of that. A lot of these are viruses. On the other side, that graph is a little bit complicated. It was looking again, we did some inhibition studies at UVLI using the CCR5 under A and CXCR4 inhibitors. And what you can see, a lot of the dark brown, yellow, and a bit of the blue is showing how they are resistant. Many of them are resistant to the CCR5 inhibitors and also be resistant to the CXCR4 receptor. And here for A we used meropenem, and I don't remember what we used for B. This is another slide I wanted to show you, looking at neutralization. And the slide is small, you can't see much, but the upper graph, which has yellow and red, across the different monoclonal antibodies that are being used. Some of them were used in CROI for treatment, for prevention, and these have been tested against historical viruses and the more recent viruses. The more, when you look at those bars, the more on your right are the historical, and the more on your right, each of the two bars are the more recent viruses. And the gray is resistance. Many of these viruses that we have now are resistant to the common monoclonal antibodies that are being planned for prevention and being used for treatment. So what we need to do is to develop more monoclonal antibodies that will work against our viruses. If we introduce them, they may not be able to work. I want to leave CROI and our work and talk a little bit about HIV vaccines. You recall last time I presented to you this trial, which was a phase 3 efficacy trial, phase 2B, where we used a number of vaccines, DNA, MVA, and protein vaccines in high-risk individuals in Uganda, in Tanzania, and in South Africa. We presented these results in IS, in other conferences. It was disappointing that these vaccines did not work. Next slide, please. This was the study. A phase 2B3 arm, two-stage HIV prophylactic vaccine trial with second randomization. In this trial, we also added PrEP. And we now have the results of PrEP. A little bit difficult to interpret because the number of new infections were very low in our studies. Next, and that, of course, the low infections, and that was the design of the study. We had about 4 different vaccines and the group that had placebo, but we made it in such a way that during the time when we thought we didn't have good vaccine immune responses, all our volunteers were on study-provided PrEP. Yeah. And then afterwards, after the third vaccination, then they started on the locally sourced PrEP. And we started looking at our endpoints at the time after the third vaccination, when we thought we had good vaccine immune responses. As I told you last time, unfortunately, these vaccines don't work. And actually, we had more infections in the vaccine arm compared to those in the placebo. But the numbers were small. We could not completely interpret. We don't think the vaccines did harm, but because of the large the confidence intervals and all that. But at least this trial gave us at least conclusion that these vaccines should not be moved to another stage. So although the vaccines, what we saw disappointing, but at least it gave us an indication that these vaccines were not preventive. So the aim of the study was reached. So what are we doing now? Next. It was very difficult for us to interpret these results because of the low number of infections. But we said, let's do some case control studies in those who got a placebo and those who got the vaccine, using the same protocols as were used for RV144 in Thailand to see if there was SIV or there are any signs of protective immune responses. Initially, this was going to be done by our colleague, working with our colleagues in HBTN, but the funding issues have disorganized that. And now we have got to work with colleagues in Germany. We hope we shall get some funding, again, to look at, do a case control study to see whether there's anything we can see that can show us some sieve analysis or immune response. The other work we're doing is to model, because these vaccines actually induce immune responses, what we call the vaccine-induced seropositivity. So we are trying to see how long these immune responses. So I don't have the results now. Hopefully, when you invite me next time, I'll give you these results. Do we need a vaccine? Some people are excited about PrEP and all that and treatment. Do we need a vaccine? And in fact, Monitor a few days ago said, excited people, a vaccine to cause new vision, 100,000 people think we have a vaccine. We don't have a vaccine, but we need it. I enjoyed Tony Fauci's presentation. Infections are still with us. We don't think we can sustain, and really we're not reaching our targets. We cannot depend on all the treatments and all that. If you have an immune response that can last long, I think you can do a good job. I'm chairing the Uganda AIDS Commission Technical Working Committee. We had a meeting, and the Uganda AIDS Commission showed us, if we don't get this level of funding, if we don't, we shall be here. If we don't get this level of funding, but I was very, very scared when they reached the level. If we get this level of funding, our epidemic will go back to the 1980s. I said, oh my God, this is very tough to sustain. We need funding, we need a lot of things. To me, I think we need a vaccine to add to our toolbox. Next, where are we with the vaccines? Unfortunately, we are still behind, but we still believe that neutralizing antibodies, if we induce good neutralizing antibodies, you'll be able to have a good vaccine that will prevent. We saw that at least the proof of concept in the AMP trial in South Africa, where some individuals were protected against particular viruses using these antibodies. So they target different parts of the envelope, and now vaccine developers are doing that. In fact, one of the new developments is now using AI, artificial intelligence, to really allow you to understand where the best epitopes for neutralization will be next. So what is happening is that there are a number of ways that people are looking at to produce these broadly neutralizing antibodies. One of them is lineage-based vaccine design, and another one that we'll talk a little bit more about is germline targeting vaccine and immunofocusing vaccine. To vaccinate individuals, target particular B cells so that you can develop those B cells into the right antibodies and you exclude the bad ones. And this either using this target, like germline targeting or sequential vaccination. Next. And a lot of these are we call experimental medicine trials to see and to look at the proof of concept. Next. And there have been a couple of studies, and those I want to mention are the IAVG002 and the IAVG003, and of course also the IAVG001. IAVG001 was conducted in the US, it was completed. IAVG002 was also done in the US, it was completed. IAVG003 has been completed in Rwanda and South Africa. And these are trying to do germline targeting. The IAVG001 was protein-based, but G002 and G003 was messenger RNA-based vaccine working with the Moderna. Next, next slide. Here I'm showing all the vaccines that are going on. This slide is a little bit outdated because some have been completed. But next, let's talk about this G002. Next, next slide. I've talked about this germline targeting to target the right B cells, naive B cells, so that you can get the right antibodies. Next. And these vaccines these trials have actually been done. And this G003, the results are out. Yeah? G002 and G003, the results are out. And they have been able to induce good immune responses, neutralizing antibodies. And they have even been able to show mutation of these antibodies, because what we need are these antibodies, long antibodies with mutations, and this has been shown in these studies in G002, G003. So there's some good news about this proof of concept that you can generate these VRC01 class antibodies that are targeting the CD4 region using them. And now another trial is being planned before you go to the conclusion, please. G004 is being planned. The challenge with these studies, and I hope this will not happen, is that in the G002 and G003, some individual got urticaria. You don't want to vaccinate people and they start scratching themselves. Yeah? So that is the only concern. And now the G003 study that is going to start, some work will be done in Africa, is to look whether this urticaria is here real. It was more in the US. Less, maybe one person goes in Africa. The G004 is another germline study that is going to be done, and they're going to look at whether this scientific urticaria is here occurring. If it occurs, maybe they'll move, and instead of using the messenger RNA, go back to using a protein as was used in the G001. Next, in conclusion, I think I've tried to tell you that better understanding of the virus replication cycle, especially integration and capsid formation, was one of the highlights in CROI. Very, very important, that can lead us to really what we're looking for, the cure. I think I've shown you that broadly neutralizing antibodies, including this one from VIV, could be part of long-acting HIV treatment. I've also shown you that T-cell-based vaccines are being tried as therapeutic vaccines to reduce further the viral reservoir. I think I've shown you that our viruses in the region are resistant to the common neutralizing antibodies. They're also resistant to some of the CCR5 and CXCR4 blocking antigens. We have not prophylactic vaccine ready for large trials, but many experimental trials are testing ways to generate broadly neutralizing antibodies. Next, I want to acknowledge Kundai from IAVI, who gave me some few slides, and my colleague Jennifer Seruanga and Sheila Barinda for their slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Karevo. Do you have any questions in-house? Yes, Dr. Sally.
Yes, Prof, thank you very much for the there's a slide you showed me which on recombinant viruses, where you showed that their responses to interference was different. What is the explanation?
The explanation, the interesting one. I think the mechanism, I think, will be quite an interesting one. Why the mechanism? Because you could see these viruses, they were, I think, could be again on the morphology of the envelope. That is the possibility. Yeah.
And do you probably know that you think the reservoir in those recombinant interactions will be different from the other
I think it's very, very important to study. We don't assume it will be the same. Even without, of course, the reservoir here in our environment is affected by many other things. The infections we have, there are many other factors. But even taking the virus per se, we should not assume, because there's so many differences in the replication cycles, the way, as I was showing you, the virus uses all these so I think we need really to compare. What is seen in subtype B or C should not be assured. Yeah. I think it will be very important. I don't know. I hope it's not, but we need to look at that.
Yeah, thanks, Prof, for the presentation. Two questions. One is about, you did talk about the observation that even new infections now, instead of using CCR5, also use CXCR4. And yet, some of the strategies now for HIV cure want to block CCR5. And there are people who are naturally have this mutation in life and they are doing well. Do you know of any people who have who are doing well without fully functional CXCR4? Because if you are just going to block one, then the alternative is that new infections will use the other receptor. Then you talked about urticaria and moving back from mRNA to protein. Is there first of all, is the urticaria so severe that it is so worrying you have to change strategies so drastically? Could it be due to adjuvant or whatever else they are using to make us? Yeah.
I think those are important ones. I think a lot of the work, those who are resistant, who have CCR5 delta mutation, have been found in the north, where again the virus is different. We have not seen them here in Africa, but I have a feeling if these viruses that we are seeing here in these populations, maybe that resistance will not be there. It will be abrogated because of the use of other co-receptors. So that's an issue. Yeah. So you cannot rely, it's difficult to rely on just one. Luckily, for subtype B, we know a lot of these other viruses use CCR5. So it could be different completely in our population. So urticaria, I think you raised an important, I don't have the data, but whether how they have gone further to look at whether it's adjuvant or not and all that, but I think they have looked at that. And because these adjuvants have been used, they're not using new adjuvants. They have been used in other vaccine candidates. So they're now looking at this, is it a messenger RNA? So if you are a healthy person, for me, unfortunately, I know urticaria, because urticaria, because it has affected me. I had spontaneous urticaria, terrible one. You scratch yourself. If we are really a normal person, would you like to get a vaccine? Then you'll be scratching yourself on the antihistamines
For a few days.
I hope it's for a few days. I think it's an important one. If you have to wait, some people will say, I would rather scratch myself, but have something that will protect me, and I take some antihistamines. But it's an interesting one.
Especially if they are warned that you might get this urticaria for many days. Yeah. Thank you so much, ED. Thank you so much, DED. Any other questions in house? Because online I don't see any questions. With that, I think we'll close that talk. Thank you, Professor. Yeah, we'll move away from the vaccines, and we'll now get into the high cost of medicines for HIV. So presenting this, evaluating the high costs of medicines for HIV is Dr. Edward Van, who is a senior researcher at the University of Oxford, primarily working on the Darwin EU and Heron UK projects. He's a long-standing contributor to observational health data sciences and informatics Odyssey network studies and open source software. Edward's research demonstrates how open source software and open data networks can drive global health impact. So with this Odyssey that we've had the Odyssey Symposium for the past 3 days actually, and has ended today. So he's been one of the participants, Dr. Edward. So he's here also to present to us at the HIV meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. So I think my slides should pop up in a second. Firstly, thank the JCRC for having me here in person. A real privilege to be here in Uganda speaking to you. So yes, I'm going to be talking about something probably a little bit different. So please, hopefully it's not too heavy, but I'm more on the side of the data and software. So I think just to set this up a little bit, we've been having a conference for the last couple of days, and and it's been the Odyssey Africa Symposium, again, supported by JCRC, so they've had a busy week. And it's all about how we can use data from across nations, across continents, internationally, bringing it together for research. And I think there's been lots of interesting points and questions from previous talks about questions around adherence and how it might differ in different countries. And we've seen presentations using data from maybe it's a US insurance record, or maybe it's a cohort study from a different country. And this is all about, wouldn't it be nice if you could do those studies across all of those countries at once, using the same data model and the same software. So next slide, please. And the next. So just to give a little bit of a background to what we're talking about, this is probably the schematic of what it looks like normally to do research with routine collected healthcare data. This data is often not collected for the purposes of research. Sometimes it is, it might be a cohort study, but there'll be some kind of long and drawn out route from taking that source data and generating evidence from it. And that route will differ for each different data source we're using. The next, please. And what the Odyssey community is all about is standardizing the data at the starting point, because that means if everybody's able to standardize healthcare data into the same format, you can then perform network studies pointing to that format, and it can save lots of time. This is the approach we use in the UK project that was mentioned across different hospitals. We also use this approach for the European Medicines Agency and the Darwin EU project, and we've done numerous international studies showing the viability of this approach. So next slide, please. And once we have this standardized data, one benefit is we can start using standardized analytics. These will be open source, so anybody can adopt them. The benefit of this is that if you map data to a common standard, you can start benefiting from the software other people have developed to that common standard. So maybe the pipeline to do disease epidemiology studies using this format of data. Somebody else has developed it, maybe we developed it as part of the European Medicines Agency project, that you can then adopt and run against your data into the same format. So this standardization of data allows for standardized analytics, which makes research faster, getting the answers quicker to the patients, and also allowing for network studies. Next slide, please. Yeah, and just a little mention about the Odyssey community. This is an international network of data sets and people, all built around kind of open source software using this specific format of data. The numerous collaborators already, numerous countries represented. Interestingly, among all the different work groups that already exist, there was no infectious disease work group that have been worked in, which is a clear gap in the market. And so that's something where we now have the Odyssey Africa chapter, and clearly there's a need and an interest in establishing that. Next slide, please. And then, yes, just to mention the Odyssey Africa chapter, the first symposium has been held in the last few days. This has been led by Agnes and Cynthia. And there's numerous data that's already been mapped to this common standard. So there's this potential for collaboration between all these different countries with all these different data sets using the common data model. Next slide, please. And just to give a little overview of data that's already being mapped to OMOP. So we've got 14 different hospitals in Rwanda. We've got various projects in Kenya. Malawi have a HIV data lake. South Africa been mapping data, as well as here at the JCRC. And all of these different countries have been mapping to this same data model. So just to take it outside of Africa and talk about the project I work on in part of my time, this is a HELM UK project. So this is using data from different data sources across the UK, different hospitals, primary care data, and so on. Next slide, please. So in the project, I'll just talk about, just to give you kind of an overview of what can be done. We were interested in access to high-cost medicines. So working with NICE, the body that that establishes the cost effectiveness of different medicines, they came up with this research question with us, and it was all about looking at the use of high cost medicines in the UK. So in primary care, which we have lots of data on in the UK, actually not many what we would call high cost medicines are being used. But whereas most high cost medicines are being used during hospital stays or also home care medicine services, which are not really captured, but they're private companies that can deliver certain infusions and injection therapies. But there's a big gap in terms of understanding what high cost medicines are being used in hospitals and who's getting them. So next slide, please. So this just set up a research question to describe the use of high cost medicines among patients in England NHS hospitals. So identify which of the high cost medicines are being used and characterize the patients receiving them. Next slide, please. And next. So these were the 4 different data partners that contributed to this study, 4 different hospitals. All of them have been mapped to the OMOP CDM, so the same data format that we talked about here at ICU Africa. Each of those data sources contribute to the research, but they don't share data. Patient level data doesn't move around, which is also the reason this is so possible in the European context. We send a code that won't get their data and then return the result. So in this study, we had the Barts, a hospital in London, Great Ormond Street, which is a children's hospital, Lancashire Teaching Hospital at University College London. Next slide, please. And we did a very high level study looking at many different medicines of interest. So identifying from the list provided by NHS England what they consider high cost drugs. And these are drugs that are not funded through regular mechanisms, so they need special approvals. That also means they don't appear in the data returned to the regulator. So there's a lack of visibility into who's taking this type of medicines. That led to 641 potential high cost medicines, some of which we didn't include for various reasons. And just to mention, as I'm here, 25 of those were HIV medications. Next slide. We created a study cohort for each of these high cost medicines based on this hospital data, identifying people having received that first medicine, looking from 2022 onwards. Next slide, please. And we characterize the people getting these medicines, the different conditions of interest, and various characteristics of those people. Next slide, please. The next. So of all that long list of potential high-cost medicines that could be used in the UK, we picked up 249 different medicines that were being used, 17 of which were high-cost HIV medicines. The Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital had 0 of those, so you won't be seeing any more results from there. But yeah, suffice it to say, we saw lots of other high-cost medicines for this study that were being used there that I wrote down today. And then in Barts, we had 13 different HIV medicines being used. Lancashire 3 and UCLH 60. Next slide, please. And just to kind of give a bit of an indication of the types of results we pull out, in kind of this automating study, we've got, for each of those high-cost medicines, we identify the individuals receiving them. We've also, because this was not a study focused solely on HIV, we also characterized different indications. So you can see a mix of proportions of whether the medicine was used entirely for people with HIV. So one kind of extreme example is ritonavir, where in Barts, almost all of the people getting it was for HIV, whereas in UCLH, it was actually concentrated for people with COVID in the early 2022. But you can see for other medicines, it's much higher. And then we can look at the different characteristics of people getting it. So the percentage male, for example, here for each of the drugs of interest. Next slide, please. And also characterizing the median age for each of those medications. Next slide, please. We can also look at the different medications people getting in combination. So here, I think this would be HIV medicines, where you can start seeing the different combinations people have. So this is just picking out one of the medications they're looking at on the day they were given that. What other medications were they also on and being given? And we can see, I would think, possibly what would be expected, but common combinations, but also much potentially small percentages of more surprising combinations. Next slide, please. We can also see everything else from that person's healthcare record. So, for example, these are other medications people were on that day, not necessarily HIV-specific medications, but you can start to see a picture of the people initiating treatment in terms of whether these were being given, as these were being given in hospitals, whether they have infections and so on. And for example, if you just take the very last one, that's over 20% of people were also on morphine in the day medication. So that's just a very, very quick tour of something we've done with UK data maps that OMAR. Looking at many different medications, working with the regulator who previously didn't have any information basically on these medicines because they didn't have visibility on inpatient prescribing in hospital. We managed to do that for 4 different English NHS hospitals, none of them needing to share data, patient level data with each other or with us, but rather we share code with them that they run locally on their data and just return the study results, which negates many of kind of the challenges in ethics and many of the delays that you don't often have for studies using real world data. And yeah, hopefully that just shows the possibility of covering many different therapeutic areas. We picked up HIV medicines. Needless to say, there were many other areas also covered, especially cancer, that I haven't done today. The next slide, please. And so that's hopefully just demonstrated how we're using this approach to a common data model, open source software in the UK. This is the same approach, like I said, we use in the European context across different European countries where all the source data is perhaps in different languages, it needs to be using different terminologies, all mapped to this common standard. That means we can run analytics nationally, internationally, working with regulators and so on. And I think this is also maybe to underline, having had the very first Odyssey Africa meeting this week, the potential for quick and relatively cheap, once data is mapped, research using routinely collected data to answer many of those questions that came up about drug adherence, for example, and doing it across different nations and across different contexts. Yeah, and maybe it's just a picture also to say that I think if you were at our conference this week, you would have noticed maybe there's a lack of HIV clinical researchers that are maybe here today, and combining those communities, I think, has a lot of potential for benefit for everybody in terms of you have the data. Programming people like me, but we need the clue answer to maybe help answer them. And the link to join is at the bottom. And I think that was my last slide. Yes, so hopefully we've also helped. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. Do we have any questions for him? Yes.
Maybe just this is a new topic, but Odyssey is observational health data sciences and information. David explained is you can work across different clinics, you can work across different countries, you can work with different data sets after you have converted them into the same language, with the common data model. For the people who have been at the Odyssey meeting, which we just ended, I think they are clear, but maybe many people in this audience today are not clear about what that means. But this is really using patient care data, which is observational data, to do research, not the clinical research that we are going to present here. So there is another way in which we can look at the data, because this is a data in the update meeting, that we can look at the data that we collect routinely in patient care. And on this last slide, we say, you can join this Odyssey community and
if you're a data scientist, a biostatistician, or even a epidemiologist or a researcher, so that you learn more and see how you can expand your breadth of research. But you talk about high cost. So what is high cost? When you say high cost in the UK, and when you say low cost in the UK might be very high for us here.
No, I imagine. So in the general definition that we would use in the UK is when a medicine has a disproportionate cost relative to the rest of these treatments. So that medicine is the overwhelming, maybe it's like 99% of the cost of treatment, the cost of treating a person is the cost of the medicine itself rather than the cost of the paying doctors that are seeing them in the hospital stay and all of this. So it's all about disproportionate cost. And that what that is in different countries obviously varies.
Because you showed maybe the antiretroviral drugs, and I know you asked us previously, what is the cost of these antiretroviral drugs here? So the cost, although patients may take the drugs free, someone is paying, but we are also using generics, so it may be difficult to compare. But if you took this data to your national health services, NHS, how are they going to use this data? How will it support? Because the research should inform how we change policy or change practice in patient care.
So yeah, in various different ways. So this project, this UK project I'm working on involves the regulator of medicine safety. So for them, they're very interested in side effects of vaccines, right? So in clinical trials, say the COVID vaccine and so on, the trials are the gold standard, but to understand the risk of adverse events, you typically need real world data at scale, once it's given to the population at large, answer those kind of questions. There's also all these questions about, okay, this is the people we saw in the trial who had these great outcomes. Are those people similar to the people that get it in routine practice? How did all those kind of inclusion criteria for the trial impact the results when you take them from real world practice and you start giving it to patients who would have entered the trial? So that's also an interest. And then maybe the last side is all those questions about adherence and so on, that you need real world data, you need to see what's happening when you're giving that medication in routine practice, that you might have some indications from a trial, but it's really until you start giving it in practice, you won't be able to answer those kind of questions.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Barnes, for the presentation. In the current climate of, we used to find the for HIV, there are so many community and even more in general. I think this gives us an opportunity to be able to perhaps address real life data outcomes and be able to compare them on the study, randomized study data outcomes. But in the UK, for instance, the NIH or NIH hospital, they use the same data. I would imagine. And and then in different parts of the world, there are different architectures of the database. So do you find it very challenging to harmonize data across different data systems? How do you overcome these challenges?
So I would say yes, it's very challenging to get to this standard format, because that standard format is not only standardizing how the data is structured, it's also standardizing terminology being used. So perhaps a data set's being coded in French with free text, and you're then transforming that to this data set. I'm sure the people at JTRC and others mapping data will agree that it's extremely challenging getting to the common data model, but that's also why these initiatives like Odyssey Africa are so important. There's so many learnings between different people doing it that makes the next person mapping their data a little bit easier. And then the real benefit is once you've got, there's a big upfront cost in terms of transforming data and getting to a common standard. But once you get to that, it means you can start answering research questions in 6 to 8 weeks using real patient data. And that's what we do for the European Medicines Agency. Historically, using real world data, routinely collected data, you might talk about a year or two to get that research question answered. Yeah.
Thank you, Edward. Maybe just to pick up from what Dr. Charlie has been asking, how easy is it to get into the databases of different hospitals? To accept to access the data and then try to transform it and standardize it.
Yeah, so the whole reason, there's different ways of doing all of this, but the whole benefit for the European Medicines Agency and many others for this approach is that there's no need for hospitals to be sharing patient level data between them. Because they all have the data mapped to a common data model, the data stays in whichever country, whichever hospital is collected at. And what we do is we share analytic code with that data partner. It's run themselves at their institution on their private server, and they would get results. So that kind of also speeds up the whole process in terms of if anyone's ever been involved in studies where it's pooling data across countries or even across hospitals, it's very challenging. Whereas the beauty with this is the patient data stays where it is, and we send code to it and collect the results back.
Sure.
After that data has been converted to a common data model.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much. I think we are now getting to speed, what policy is about, but also what we've discussed. I don't know if you have any other questions, or we'll end it there. Online, I don't see, and in-house, I don't see any hands up, so I think we'll close it there. We'll stop now attending. And invite you to attend the next session tomorrow, starting at 1. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Yeah.
This is a separate. This